I cheated on my husband and faced unimaginable consequences that changed both our lives forever. I'm telling this fully aware that many will dislike me for my actions and the consequences of my betrayal. Reading my own words is disgusting because I know what I did is unforgivable. I understand too well how needlessly tragic the events were. My hope is simply that my story can be shared with anyone in a relationship, and maybe it prevents future betrayals. Specifically, I hope someone cheating or thinking about it might read this and pause. Many might think my example of what can go wrong being unfaithful is a rare occurrence. People more knowledgeable than I am have told me my situation is sadly not unique. But I'm willing to take the hate I'll receive by sharing this if it prevents even one person from breaking a loved one's heart. I'm a 28-year-old woman married to a wonderful man I'll call William. 8 months ago, he confronted me with proof I'd been emotionally and physically unfaithful. A few days later, he committed self-destruction. Typing those words out has caused people I don't even know to hate me. I couldn't believe I had the capacity to do something so evil, hurting someone I'd loved since childhood. But I did it. If you'd asked either me or William if either of us would ever be unfaithful, we both would have laughed. But to my shock, I allowed myself to lose focus and stray. I knew it would destroy him if he ever found out, but I took the heart of the man I loved and crushed it so cruelly he couldn't endure the pain of this life anymore. To those thinking I don't deserve to be breathing, I agree. I've attempted self-destruction twice. I'm convinced there's a reason I'm still here. For now, I've convinced myself that the longer I live, the more I suffer, and I don't deserve the mercy of self-destruction. Honestly, William and I grew up together. I can remember my early youth, and I always knew William. We were in the same Sunday school and public school classes. Our families were friends long before we came along. He always made me laugh. Kids can be mean, but William never was. I realized I thought he was cute in 6th grade, and it became an official crush in high school. William and I were each other's only loves from early high school through college. We were best friends and cherished each other. After graduation, we took a year to get stable jobs near our families and decided to get married. We took vacations together and were ravenous for each other. The only time closeness was off the table was during that time of the month, but we'd make love for hours. Beautiful moments of passion, and I threw it all away for something tawdry, cheap, and worthless. We were planning to have children, knew their names, and were both pure. He was my first everything, and I was his. Part of me wishes I could say I had a drunken one-night stand, but no, I got involved with a man inferior to my husband. I didn't even consider the possibility that a friendship with another man could lead to an attachment forming. My husband and I had a strong marriage. As foolish as it sounds now, we really did. My husband was the epitome of strength, and I was the weak one. Before this, I considered myself a strong woman. It's just that no one ever told me that while our relationship was strong, no relationship is bulletproof. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wish someone had shot me before anything I did became secretive. It's an indisputable fact. The world would be far better with my husband here instead of me. I had many chances to stop it before anything happened, and I had no reason to allow anything to happen. After a brief and heated conversation, he walked out, and I never spoke to him again. I tried to contact him in every way I could think of. I tried so many times just to let him know I'm truly sorry and that I hate what I did. My text to him never showed anything but an unread status to me, so I doubt he read any emails or heard any voicemails. But everyone said I needed to give him space and time to think. 2 nights after William confronted me, at 3:17 a.m., there was a loud knock at the front door. I turned on the lights, thinking it might be someone drunk wanting to curse me out or worse. Then there was another loud knock, and I quickly put on a hoodie before going to the door. When I opened it and saw 2 policemen, I knew they could be there for many reasons, but I instantly understood why they were there. They told me my husband's body had been found due to an apparent self-destruction, and it devastated me. I dropped to my knees, wailing, tearing at my skin and hair as the police tried to calm me down. When the EMTs arrived, I was sitting on the steps, rocking back and forth, repeating apologies. I couldn't make it to the funeral, even if William's family had allowed my family to attend. I was kept sedated for days. The first thing I wanted to do when I got out was visit William's grave, but nobody knew where his parents had him buried, and that hurt deeply. That night, I attempted self-destruction for the first time. I've now been hospitalized twice for attempted self-destruction. I'm not asking for pity. In fact, I don't want it. Nothing can take away this heartache, and nothing can numb it. Part of me wishes I had somehow forced him to see me, just for a moment, to tell him how sorry I am and that I knew our marriage was over. But I didn't get that. No, I didn't deserve it. I have to face the fact that what I did was so vile that making my husband see me might have forced him to take his life even sooner. Many people have said my actions led him to take his life, and I don't doubt it. Until that horrible day, we were incredibly happy. No self-destruction note verified I caused his passing away, but we had been so happy, loving nearly every moment together. To go from that bliss to grief quickly ended him. I ended him. My words, actions, and thoughts betrayed us. Both. Regret doesn't damage you. If it did, I would have died before my husband ever confronted me. When COVID hit, William and I quarantined together. I taught at an exclusive private school, and our salary was assured as long as isolation was needed. William worked from home, making progress on a project. Despite the world's worries, we enjoyed our time together, getting closer. I am truly sorry for those who lost a loved one to the horrible disease, but my husband and I grew closer during those weeks. We joked about others struggling with family time. We simply couldn't get enough of each other. After the first month, we agreed to limit arguments to once a day for about a week. Our only argument during quarantine was about doing laundry just to put clean sheets on the bed again. I cheated on that man, leading him to end his life due to my actions. I hate myself in many ways, but knowing I had it all is the most difficult pill to swallow. My affair with Paul, the lacrosse coach, started innocently during Zoom meetings. No attraction was present when we met face to face. There was zero attraction, at least from me, and I didn't sense any lustful attention from him toward me. During that introduction, I learned he was engaged, and I told him I was happily married. No closeness, tension, or anything hinting it would ever be a possibility. The school allowed half the staff and students to attend in person for a week, while the other half used Zoom. The next week, they switched. This was to help with social distancing and the students' feelings of isolation. While eating lunch one day before my next class, I got an email from Paul asking me to edit toasts and jokes for his upcoming wedding. I was used to editing, so it was nothing I felt important enough to tell William. Since it pertained to Paul's wedding, I saw no reason to bore my husband with details about that day. The email included a toast to Paul's parents and to the bride's parents. I took what he said and added a few phrases to tug at the heartstrings of all who attended. The jokes aimed at his brother, who was the best man, were really funny but a bit too crude for my taste at a wedding. I mentioned this when I sent back his edited speeches. He laughed it off, saying I didn't understand his family's sense of humor, which included teasing. This email exchange marked several months of back-and-forth communication, but surprisingly, nothing inappropriate happened until the very end. Throughout our conversations, there was never any flirting or escalation. We did discuss taxes, but our talks were purely scientific and psychological, making even the biggest nymphomaniac in history drier than the Sahara. The discussions about race, politics, religion, science, and sports sometimes got heated. I was called prudish for my tax opinions, but I enjoyed the discussions, confident there was no temptation on either end. All of this occurred during work hours. My husband and I had a landline for emergencies, and once we were home, our smartphones were turned off. Paul didn't even have my number to text until I emailed him with a witty remark late in the day. He asked for my number to counter what I'd sent. Many CO workers had my email, so I didn't think much of it. I genuinely believed Paul had no interest in pursuing me, as he was smitten with his fiancée at the time. However, about a month before their wedding, Paul discovered his girlfriend had been having an affair with her high school boyfriend for over a year. He was shocked and deeply hurt. Unintentionally, I became the person he vented to. I'm not sure when our conversations crossed a line, but I started feeling genuinely sorry for Paul. I despised his fiancée for what she did, and I saw nothing wrong with that. After a particularly tough night for him, he looked frazzled at school, and I could tell he'd been crying. I gave him a hug and he asked if we could talk after school. Since I had a few hours before William got home, I agreed. In hindsight, I realized what drew me into conversations with Paul was a different opinion. William and I had discussed almost every imaginable topic, and I usually knew his response most of the time. I craved surprise or verbal conflict. It was foolish, pathetic, and weak, but that led to the affair. Everything with William was perfect, and we spent every available moment together. I mentioned a coworker named Paul to William, but as nothing was happening, I didn't elaborate, and he saw no reason to pry. When William had to go out of town for 3 weeks, we FaceTimed daily, and I missed him intensely. With sudden spare time, I found myself texting Paul just to pass the time. Instead of occasional conversations, Paul and I often had dinner and drinks before going home. Oddly enough, what led to us becoming physical was me spraining my ankle and the school nurse being unavailable that week. I hurt my ankle and went to Paul, assuming he, as a coach, had numbing spray or an ace bandage. While he was tending to my ankle, I noticed he had an apparent hardness. I was surprised until I realized he could see slightly up my skirt from his position. For a moment, I found it stimulating that I was turning him on. I adjusted myself to see if a slightly better view would arouse him more. He called me out on it, and I laughed, telling him to work out his frustrations with his girlfriend. Suddenly, He kissed me, and I pushed him away. He kissed me again, and this time I didn't resist. We made out for a few minutes before I snapped out of it, hurriedly left his classroom, and sat in my own classroom in disbelief of what had just happened. I didn't intend for it to happen, and I'm sure Paul didn't either. Unsure whether to call William immediately or wait until he got home that night, I spoke to Paul after classes. He apologized, advised me not to bring conflict into my marriage, and suggested we stay friends. With William out of town and focused on work, I didn't want to add more stress. After discussing Tulsa with William that night, I decided to wait until he got home. His company faced issues causing delays and extending William's stay by 2 weeks. Paul was there for me to discuss what had happened between us. I couldn't confide in my female friends or family who all loved William. If I had known, maybe strangers on a site like this would have been the best option. Unfortunately, I vented to the last person I should have. One Friday after work, Paul and I went to a new restaurant for dinner. We sat at the bar, had a few drinks, and I explained my unease about telling my husband. Paul asked how I thought William would take the news, and I suggested he might want to call in sick the next day. I told William. He asked if I thought he would fight Paul, and I said no. However, I knew it would mean the end of Paul and I talking. Paul confessed he might not have made it through his breakup without me. I assured him I was glad to help and didn't regret it. As the realization that our friendship would end sank in, we both felt a bit depressed. We drank too much, and I ended up at Paul's apartment doing more than kissing. As soon as it was over, guilt set in. Yes, it should have set in earlier, but I knew my marriage was over. William and I had both said society allows too many second chances for those who don't deserve them. While we believe cheaters deserve a second chance, it could never be with the betrayed spouse. Things got complicated when William returned from Tulsa. I was having my period, so I knew there would be no closeness between us. Thankfully, I wouldn't have subjected my husband to diseases. Despite wanting to make love to William one last time, I couldn't allow that. I wrote a long letter confessing what I had done and planned to give it to William after a face-to-face confession. To this day, I don't know how William discovered what was going on. He may have been monitoring my online conversations with Paul from day one. I never got to ask him how he found out, and the realization that he learned about my betrayal before I could tell him caused me to fall to my knees, swearing I planned to confess. William didn't believe me, and I wouldn't have either. He had a stack of texts between Paul and me printed out. Though I didn't deny any of the accusations, that honesty came far too late. He packed a few things and left me on a Monday evening. Wednesday night, he drove to a shopping center, parked his car, and took his own life. Knowing I had destroyed our relationship tortured my soul like never before. Realizing I robbed him of a chance to find someone else to be happy with broke me. The understanding that I didn't just end my relationship with William, but also every relationship he had or would have filled me with more guilt than I could ever express. I could discuss everything that has occurred since William's passing, but many details might not interest most people. Simply put, his family and mine hold strong negative feelings toward me. My family remains disgusted by my actions, and their disappointment and shame persist. Their love for me endures, but the sense of disappointment and shame will never fade, and rightly so. The outcomes were not what I intended, but when choices lead to pain and suffering, we bear the guilt of causing that grief. I see a therapist twice a week to work through things. Through my therapist, I met someone genuinely helping me sort through my feelings. Years ago, she intentionally set a small fire as a joke, but it quickly spread, causing multiple endings of life. We've discussed various aspects of her story and mine. Things can't be the way they once were, nor should they. To keep living, I need a plan to make the remaining part of my life as meaningful as possible. So, that's essentially my story. If anyone wants to post hate messages and call me a wretched person, go right ahead. If it helps you release your rage, consider me your verbal punching bag. For those who have been cheated on, some of you may have been intentionally betrayed. But those who had a partner just as perplexed about the cheating as you were, listen to my story. It doesn't justify anything I did, quite the opposite. But if it helps you understand that you bear little responsibility for the infidelity, so be it. To unrepentant cheaters, I hope you listen to my cautionary tale and recognize your ability to destroy not just someone else but also your relationships and a significant part of yourself. I know I can't preach or judge anyone but myself. I just hope no one finds their William and loses them or sinks to the depths I did. Most importantly, I want people in great relationships to cherish and never take them for granted. Humans aren't immune to being swayed under the wrong conditions. When we love someone, we carry part of their soul with us. One betrayal makes it impossible for that person to hold that piece of you again. I had my husband's heart in my hands, and now I deserve never to hold it again, nor will he ever hold mine. This life has too much pain without hurting the ones we love. Love is too precious to risk on anything. Update: I cheated, causing my husband to commit self-destruction days after confronting me. This is intended as a final response. William likely didn't read it, and considering he's been dead a year, I doubt it was him. For those trying to psychoanalyze me, I appreciate the effort, even if it was for your own self-interest. Professionals haven't provided a good theory for why I let things happen. I feel like there should be some valid reason why I did what I did too. I just can't come up with one, and it wouldn't be a valid reason if I found one. For those thinking this is fake, I can't fathom a reason to post this other than to warn and perhaps help. It wasn't a karma grab, I've barely responded, so it wasn't for attention. And it certainly wasn't to lift my spirits because I've rightfully been slammed for my betrayal. Admitting to something horrible is not easy. Imagining it never happened doesn't help me, but you all do. I do not keep in contact with Paul and have not heard from him since before William committed self-destruction. The only things I know about him are secondhand from people I worked with. I have no interest in being with Paul or having him in my life in any way. So, those thinking I planned my vile actions to ride off into the sunset with a lacrosse coach, no. Bless you all. May you have stellar lives full of happiness, but most of all, peace. I was married to my wife for 4 years, and our marriage faced challenges due to her struggle with drinks. Even before we tied the knot, I knew she enjoyed drinking, particularly at parties. She was the kind of person who loved to indulge in drinks during social events. We first met at a club where she and her friends were celebrating a birthday. I was instantly attracted to her and approached her in the group. That night, we talked and spent the rest of the evening at the club. After meeting, we went home together because she asked if she could come with me. On that first night, we became faithful. Despite my wife thinking I was only interested in a one-night stand, I felt differently. I genuinely liked her, and our closeness deepened my feelings for her. In the following weeks, we started dating after spending time together at least twice a week for 3 months. At the time, she had just finished college and was working hourly jobs until she could land her desired job. Early on, I knew she had a drinking issue, but I didn't expect it to escalate to the point of needing rehab. After over a year of dating, we got married, officially moved in together, and unfortunately, a year later, she lost her parents and only sibling in a tragic accident. This intensified her emotional struggle, leading her to cope with the pain through excessive drinking. I thought her extreme drinking might be a temporary response to mourning, but it persisted months after the burial. She didn't recover from her family's loss, becoming a shadow of her former self. Despite my efforts to comfort her, she was in a dark mental state. Around the same time, she experienced a breakdown, adding to her emotional turmoil. She stopped working, and the responsibility of caring for both of us fell on me. On days when she wasn't drinking, she displayed aggression and anger over trivial matters. I walked in on my wife making out with a neighbor, and I was really angry. She was drunk, but he seemed sober. I kept the neighbor away and informed his wife. Yet I couldn't take any action against my wife, thinking she wasn't in the right state of mind. I was wrong because a few days later, I caught her talking to the same neighbor. When she saw me, she immediately walked away. Meanwhile, her drinking problem worsened. If I gave her money, she'd spend it all on drinks, reaching a point where she couldn't go a day without drinking. I got frustrated and tired of putting up with her, handling bills alone, and still caring for her. It became overwhelming, so I decided to get her help when there was no other option. I informed her I was taking her to rehab, and after several months of persuasion, she finally went. Seeing a significant improvement, I was relieved to be getting my wife back. As a concerned husband, I finally found peace as she broke free from her bad habits and started rebuilding her life. However, my relief didn't last. One day, while enjoying YouTube at home, my wife announced she was marrying the love of her life. I didn't take it seriously at first and just laughed it off. But when she mentioned her rehab coach, Ryan, I became attentive. According to her, Ryan was the one for her, and they were in love, planning to get married. She praised him for treating her well, talking nicely, and more. I was shocked and knew she was going crazy. The Ryan she talked about was already a married man with 2 kids, making no sense. I was sure she didn't come up with the marriage idea on her own, so I confronted Ryan on her next meeting day. When I shared everything my wife said, Ryan said she was delusional. Somehow, my wife had overheard his responses. She'd been eavesdropping on our conversation. Upon hearing him, she left her hiding spot, tears streaming from her eyes. She sobbed like a baby and simultaneously showed me a video of her and Ryan, both with nothing on, in bed and in the bathroom. Ryan had recorded it during their last hotel encounter and sent it to her. She claimed Ryan vowed to divorce his wife so they could marry. When she presented the video, Ryan, angered, berated her, calling her foolish for thinking he'd leave his wife for an unstable woman. His words shattered her heart. I'd never seen my wife cry like that since losing her family. It became clear she truly loved Ryan, even planning to divorce me for him, which deeply saddened me. I was furious with Ryan for exploiting my wife, his client. To give him a taste of his own medicine, I pressed charges using the video as evidence in court. Sharing this is easy because the hurt and heartbreak almost shattered me. Despite the challenges my wife presented, I still loved her and tried to help her return to normal. Unfortunately, she cheated on me in return, planning to divorce me for her rehab coach. I felt pity for her when she discovered Ryan's deceit and nearly fell into depression. Out of compassion, I admitted her to a mental hospital, and after her admission, I initiated a divorce. Although it seemed she wasn't in her right state of mind, she was clear-headed enough to consider divorcing me. Honestly, our relationship was a significant waste of time, resources, and emotions, but I'll view it as a life lesson. Here's a piece of free advice. Some women aren't worth the sacrifices most men make. Even if you give them the universe, they might still find an excuse to cheat. Regarding Ryan, I won the court case, and he received a jail term for exploiting his mentally unstable client. The government also shut down his business. I often miss my wife, but I won't let her problems excuse breaking our marital vows and cheating on me.
To their partners. These family outings were legitimate. The entire family shares pictures of them on Facebook, and my wife sends photos from the events. There were 2 of these gatherings, and each time my wife came home, she seemed robotic. Our intimate life appeared normal, if not quieter than usual, but due to her depression, she occasionally becomes distant. When I asked if she was doing all right, she attributed it to her mood fluctuations. 2 weeks ago, she left for work, and since it was my day off, I puttered around the house, dropped our son off at school, and came home to check my email. On Facebook, I noticed a message from her cousin. We had recently discussed going to see a farm team baseball game, so I assumed he was getting back to me. The message read, "I'd like to see you on your knees." I was confused until I realized my wife was still signed in, and he was addressing her. I wanted to confront him. I immediately rushed to read through their chat log, discovering his inappropriate advances, despite her repeated statements like, "But I'm married," and "No, I'm married." These refusals seemed hesitant, as if she were saying no out of obligation rather than desire. I was disgusted and utterly shocked. However, since none of them mention anything happening yet, and she is denying him albeit kindly, I can't exactly say she's cheating. When she got home and our son was put to bed, I confronted her about the situation. She instantly broke down into hysterics and tears, saying things like, "I didn't do anything. I didn't know how to tell you. I was just hoping he stopped." Both of us have suffered childhood ravishtation from family friends, attended years of therapy for it, and for that reason, we have very good communication skills regarding comfort, boundaries, and expressing ourselves about unwanted advances. I love her, and I wanted to believe her, but the way she didn't tell me and acted seemingly normal leads me to believe something else was going on. I told her I believed her and asked if I could message him to tell him to back off and express my disgust, or if she preferred to handle it herself. Initially, she expressed that she would tell him that I knew and not to contact her, but her resolve cracked as she was confident this would just stop. I was furious about that but didn't express it and told her that knowing she wasn't going to, I was going to give him a piece of my mind. This is my wife, and if she's being intimidated, I will end it. And if she's not being intimidated, she's cheating on me. So I messaged him. He saw it but made no reply. The wife insists I should have allowed her to handle the situation, but I explained there was no way I could stay silent in the face of this. She seemed to grasp my perspective and eventually acknowledged that confronting him was probably the right course, as she didn't know how to handle it herself. Everything appeared to return to normal, but 3 days later, I come home to find her in tears. When I inquire about the cause, she says, "It's Max. You should have let me handle it. I messaged him yesterday, and he won't talk to me." We revisited the conversation about my refusal to passively endure someone intimidating my wife. During the discussion, she gave me a look, brief but telling, leaving me with the impression that she didn't perceive it as pastoring. We concluded the conversation, agreeing that I had handled it the way any man would. 2 days later, I'm getting to bed late, around 2 a.m., as I was finishing up some work. I overhear her on the phone with someone laughing. This is unusual. She claimed it was her mom discussing something related to our kid's birthday, but I doubted the explanation. At this point, I've decided to play ignorant to observe the situation from a more comfortable vantage point. The next day, she's crying again, and I've reached my limit. She's been emotionally unstable for 2 weeks now. When I inquire if it's about Max again, she reveals that she tried to call and apologize for not handling the situation herself, but he still isn't talking to her. I admit it, I snapped. I told her that either he was abusing her or she was cheating on me, and I caught them. I'll be on the couch tonight, obviously. I wanted to believe her, but I'm not naive. I'm essentially lying here. waiting for some solid truth because it's increasingly feeling like something is amiss. And if that's the case, I'm about to go 95,000 megaton nuclear on the both of them. She goes to work in 6 hours. I plan to apologize for my outburst and ask her to sit down and talk tonight. It's Sunday, and our son typically stays the night with my parents every other Sunday. I'm not proud of it, but I believe it's in my best interest to do some snooping. If I find nothing, we will discuss what happened, when it started, how I can support her, and what steps we should take moving forward. I love her, and the idea that she's being intimidated by someone who should love her breaks my heart. However, if I discover something questionable or learn that she was complicit in any way, I'm ending the relationship immediately. I don't believe in marriage counseling for instances of infidelity, and even if I did incest, there is no way I could look at her the same again. Update. I didn't sleep at all last night, and when she woke up, I prepared breakfast. I acknowledged that I shouldn't have exploded and suggested we sit down tonight to discuss things. Strangely, she agreed as if she wasn't initially upset, admitting she had likely been acting poorly. I emphasized that the aggravation she faced was particularly challenging since he is a family member, and she appeared to agree. Initially reluctant to snoop, the advice from many here convinced me to check her emails. Despite her composed demeanor this morning, I proceeded. The disgust, hatred, and anger I feel are beyond expression, leading to an inevitable divorce. An email titled "Yummy" revealed a picture of her cousin with nut on his face. The exchanges detailed his encounters with random gay men, referencing past reproductive experiences together, including a picture of an accessory for reproductive body part captioned, "I still have our old friend." The subsequent repugnant conversation portrayed her in a dominating manner, insulting his reproductive body part size. Analyzing the dates, I realized this transpired a year ago. As I continued reading, it became evident, at least from the text, that they used to engage frequently but stopped after our marriage. We were together for several years before getting married. Later, she invoked the "I'm married" excuse. But it seems like it's his kink to be told he can't touch her anymore, which he probably enjoys. Raising her child, I feel betrayed after 6 years of adjusting my work schedule and passing up better-paying jobs to ensure I can watch him. Overwhelmed, I went outside, called my brother, explained the situation, and asked him to hold on to my weapon temporarily. Despite not being a violent person, my mental state fluctuates between wanting to damage him and myself. I won't act on these impulses, but I fear a breakdown and can't trust myself to behave rationally. After this, I'm packing my clothes and checking into a hotel. These conversations have been printed, copies sent to myself, and when I have time, I'll uncover more evidence. Bought a pack of cigarettes despite quitting 4 years ago. Now, I must schedule an appointment at an STD clinic because, according to their explicit conversations, part of his obsession involves unprotected lovemaking with other men. I've never used protection with my soon-to-be ex-wife due to her contraceptive device. Now I face months of anxiety awaiting AIDS test results. Knowing his work schedule, possibly due to my past employment at the same company, I contemplate driving down to see his wife with evidence in hand. There's no fixing this, no therapy, no hope, and I have no interest in entertaining an apology. I'm filing for divorce, and she will receive nothing. Despite not feeling depressed or sad, I harbor a hot ball of rage in my chest, momentarily cooled by cigarettes. I can't be near her or him, and though I asserted I'm not violent, I find myself yearning to confront both of them physically. Regarding the family outings, they were genuine. The entire family posts pictures on Facebook, and my wife sends photos from these events. There were 2 such occasions, and each time she returned home, she seemed robotic. Our intimate life appeared normal, if not quieter than usual, but due to her depression, she occasionally becomes distant. When I asked if she was doing all right, she attributed it to her mood fluctuations. Update. My stepson is not a result of incest. He bears a striking resemblance to his biological father. A paternity test was necessary to establish child support, and once confirmed, his father disappeared, having been heard from only once in the past 4 years. The past couple of days have been an emotional roller coaster. In summary, I discovered that my wife has been cheating on me with her cousin Max for an extended period. Given the duration, it might as well be considered her cheating on Max with me. I consulted a lawyer initially, and then went directly to Max's home to speak with his wife. Understandably, she was heartbroken and disgusted by the incest revelation. During our conversation, I also informed her that Max was bragging to my wife about engaging in unprotected encounters with random internet men, sharing explicit photos with nut on his face. Despite my advice against it, she insisted on seeing the pictures and was deeply affected. Max, identifying as bioproductive, frequently engaged with random guys. His wife believed he hadn't done this in well over a year, allowing him occasional outings to get it out of his system. Afterward, I stayed the night in a hotel, where I spoke with my mother, brother, and father. My mother-in-law left numerous voicemails, begging me to discuss the situation. Ignoring them, I received multiple calls from my wife, which I chose not to answer. Presuming she knew about my documentation efforts, she refrained from sending texts, a strategy I would employ in her position. Eventually, I called her and kept it brief, stating we would talk the next day. Upon returning home, my wife was emotionally distraught, attempting to hug me, but I declared it over. She vehemently denied any infidelity, suggesting I misinterpreted things, blaming Max's wife for spreading rumors due to their mutual hatred. At this point, I realized my wife thought I'd learned about the affair from someone else, unaware of my independent discovery. I then presented the evidence, papers containing explicit photos of Max titled Yummy, and a picture of a large accessory for reproductive body part labeled Our Old Friend. The documents revealed her engaging in a dominatrix role, instructing him in a power play scenario. She even asked him to send pictures after encounters, which was stomach-churning. Despite my openness to kinky activities, she shifted from sadness to explosive anger and complete hysterics when realizing I had discovered the affair and informed Max's wife. Her outburst included statements like, "You should have talked to me first," and "She's telling everyone, this will ruin me." I exploded, reminding her that I had read a year's worth of texts and emails, and she never once asked him to stop. I called her a degenerate, expressed concern about potential AIDS exposure, and despite her crying, declared our impending divorce. Subsequently, I called her father, urging him to come to my house as she shouldn't be alone in that state. I returned to my hotel room and saw that Max's wife had been texting me. She had done some intense digging on her own and found discussions about reproductive encounters they had from 2010 on freaking MySpace. She told me early on in our relationship that he once tried to kiss her at 13, while they were actually freaking at 16 or 15 or during a time where MySpace was still widely being used. I'll admit it, this seeing it went on that far back was finally what broke me. I'm not big on emotional displays, but I broke down crying in front of his wife. She cried too. When that was over, I took her to the lawyer I'm seeing, and now one of his partners will be handling her divorce. Through all this, Max has been panicking and crying, trying to find out where his wife is trying to talk to me. Still, after all this evidence, trying to ensure this is all some big misunderstanding. It turns out that Max and ex-wife live in a house owned by Max's parents, and they have come down hard against their son, telling him he cannot stay there anymore, and apologizing to their dill, and saying she's welcome to stay with their grandchild in that house for as long as she wants. He's basically disowned. Max's father even got it in his head somehow that Max was ravishing my wife as a child, and that is why she is doing what she is doing today. She is his favorite niece, basically a second daughter. So Max, in effect, is on the lam because his old man wants him dead. My father, unprompted and wanting to help me, assured me he'd pay my hotel for the week. Today I told my boss point blank, no filter, exactly what's happened, and that I'm taking 2 weeks to sort my life out. He remarked about how poopty his divorce was and told me to take whatever time I needed bottle-fed, and that he'll just tell everyone on the floor I've got a sick parent or something, which was sweet of him. Lying down in my hotel room, now missing a stepson I'll probably never see again. I raised him for 6 years, changed his diapers, bottle-fed him at 3 a.m., took time out of work when he was sick, waited on him hand and foot after a nasty fall that broke his arm so his mother could sleep because she was working in the morning. The rest of this world could burn away to freaking ash, and I wouldn't blink or care, but the thought of never seeing him again rips away at me like nothing else. I need therapy. Gonna take a heck of a lot of talking to get through this. I'm not a self-destruction risk, so no worries there. I'm an atheist, so this is the only life I got. If I end it, that's it, LOL. Talking to my lawyer on the phone later, and we'll be meeting up with Max's SO again, because apparently there's more I don't know. Got a doctor's appointment tomorrow, and then 6 darn months of waiting for results. Update. Today is the day we've chosen to inform my son about the unfolding changes. It's not a conversation either of us looks forward to, but it's inevitable. Last night, I had a phone conversation with my soon-to-be ex, STBX, and her tone surprised me. Initially accepting of the divorce, she didn't resist. During the call, she teared up, attempting to explain her relationship with her cousin and insisting that during the years we were together, it was only random dirty texts and nothing physical occurred. I sense a storm approaching because now she insists on having my car. She argues that since I work 20 minutes from our current residence and she works an hour away, it's necessary. Considering this old rust bucket has only 2 good years left, I'm contemplating giving it up and getting a new car, as I'll need one anyway. However, I fear that acquiescing to this now might set a precedent for my entire life. Through this, I've realized I don't feel like leaving my apartment. Knowing she's moving in with her folks, I might wait until she's gone, likely in a week according to Facebook, and then discuss the situation with my landlord. Due to COVID, he's had trouble filling some units, so he might welcome me sticking around. I had breakfast with my dad. While he approached the topic lightly, he essentially advised against writing anything that would obligate me to stay in my stepson's life. Despite not dismissing my stepson, he always makes time for him and spoils him on holidays, birthdays, and with random toys. He's a proud grandpop. His reasoning is to wait and see how my STBX behaves and if it aligns with what I want in my life. He reminded me that I passed on the opportunity to go to school to become a family man, and the family wouldn't hold it against me if I chose not to be a father anymore. They love my son, but they don't want to see me fall on my sword by tying myself to that crazy family for life. More or less, they'll support me no matter what I decide. Maybe consulting my therapist in 3 weeks will change my perspective, but currently, I'm adamant about remaining a father. Afterwards, I took Sherry to meet with Max. I didn't accompany her, as it might lead to trouble. Instead, I hung out in the Sonic drive-thru, listening to music, buying drinks a couple of times to justify my presence, and waiting for her to text me to be picked up. When it was over, she was somewhat worse off. Max blamed my STBX for the fact that things didn't end years ago, claiming the guys he alleged to have crazy hookups with were part of a fabricated dirty story with my STBX. If he's telling the truth, it was just the one guy, his boyfriend, and he made up the rest as part of this dirty story. It sounds questionable, but for some reason it seems true to me. Sherry was devastated, mostly because he appeared sleep-deprived, didn't acknowledge his daughter, and hadn't said anything about her until she brought up the subject. She was visibly upset, and I brought her home. However, she did well at keeping it together for the baby. Not wanting to leave her in that state, I stayed and helped prepare dinner. I showed her how to make improvised garlic bread and pasta. I learned that she sings a French language song to her daughter, and I was a little smitten with that. However, I also noticed that Sherry has some of my son's hand-me-down baby furniture, which truly highlighted how messed up this situation is. When I left, we shared a prolonged parting hug, no words. I received a kiss on the cheek, and I kind of rode that high for the rest of the night. The enormity of my life right now is challenging to grasp. I didn't think it was possible to be filled with such hate and anger while also feeling that fluffy. Update. It's been almost 3 weeks since my D-Day, and over a month since my life took a drastic turn. I haven't delved into the state of my marriage in previous posts, but for today's therapeutic typing session, I'll touch on it briefly. If this is your first time reading my posts, the TLDR is as follows. I accidentally discovered on Facebook that my soon-to-be ex-wife was involved in a reproductive affair with her cousin, Max. I informed Max's wife about the situation, leading her to expose our partners. Throughout this, Max's wife and I started casually dating due to discovering a mutual attraction. I filed for divorce yesterday, heading to the courthouse to speak with the bailiff or sheriff on the other side of the counter and complete the necessary paperwork. My STBX and I, aiming for a quick resolution, decided against involving lawyers and agreed on the division of assets without the need for mediation. We attempted to serve her at the courthouse immediately after I submitted the paperwork, aiming to avoid law enforcement serving her at her home or workplace. I'm usually level-headed, and surprisingly, my STBX, who is not typically calm, is equally eager to conclude this chapter. However, it turns out she can't be served the way we planned, leading me to drive her home to her folks. Despite all this, I inquired about how things were going. Her facade crumbled a bit, and through tears, she admitted she's doing fine with me gone. She only feels bad when my stepson asks for me or expresses sadness about my absence. She confessed that she's been unhappy in our marriage since before we got married. It wasn't resentment or hatred. She just fell out of love with me. Our bed life, while both of us are active and reproductive, lost its synchronicity a while ago. We both knew it, and we had several conversations in our marriage about it. I like to pursue, hate to be chased. She loves to pursue, hates to be chased. Something was bound to break, and we had several talks about this. For a while, we switched roles so we could both get what we wanted, but it eventually turned into me sacrificing my reproductive desires to only have lovemaking in the ways she wanted. Some things she wanted me to do, I never liked and never improved at, and seemingly out of spite, she rejected the things I excelled at. Meanwhile, she rarely, if ever, fulfilled my requests as time went on. In the middle of our relationship, we had a female live-in roommate with whom we shared mutual attraction. Under strict guidelines and rules, she became someone we frequently engaged with, providing a temporary fix. Despite our reproductive issues, The STBX and I were a good team, excelling in financial communication and parenting, always presenting a united front. We enjoyed the same movies, both being artistically inclined. I'm a writer, and she's an illustrator. We had a myriad of commonalities that made us best friends and a great team. But the reproductive problems persisted. While the third person was in the relationship, that tension disappeared, and we worked seamlessly together as our frustrations and needs were met by a third party. Eventually, this third woman moved out, ending things on good terms, primarily because she wanted a boyfriend, and no guy would go in for a setup like that. Around this period, Max and Sherry moved into Max's parents' second home. They had been residing in Sherry's home state for a few years until he lost his job. According to the STBX, Max re-established contact with her during this time. Initially, they met up as ordinary cousins, but one day, she chose to share her frustrations, likely an invitation, about her bed life, leading to an affair. They would only meet up around family gatherings, using excuses to disappear. I recall instances when I couldn't find her. We got married around this time, so I can only assume it happened at our own wedding. At this point, I really don't feel like listening to this, and the STBX mentions that she is now seeing a therapist and wants to treat me like her priest in confession. Everything concerning their affair I was hearing for the first time. I guess it's good that I know the truth, but since it impacts my life in no way, there's really no point for me to be hearing it. She also tells me that the out-of-state aunt who died, and she cried for a week over, was actually her crying after Sherry called her to happily inform her she was pregnant. That means at one point, I was actively holding my wife and comforting her as she cried over another man. I feel more betrayed now than when I discovered the texts. This revelation follows a weekend where I got to spend 2 whole days alone with my stepson. I had such a good time, and he did too, as it's the longest time we've been together since D-Day. He's 6 and likes Minecraft, so I got a console version for split-screen play. He mentioned missing me but loves seeing his grandparents every day. They spoil him. So, after this great weekend of video games and playing catch, typical dad stuff, I'm really positive about staying a dad until she drops all this new info on me. I've got to be real. I'm finding the whole idea of having to be around this woman for the rest of my life, voluntarily, something I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do. As a parent, I should be able to get over my own issues and keep a level head for the sake of the child, but given the circumstances, throwing in the towel becomes a more and more attractive idea. That, more than losing my wife, more than the betrayal, breaks my heart. I'm going to see him again Friday night, and going to see if I can still fight through this. On the Sherry front, I'll keep it brief as this is already way too long. Max stopped calling or taking calls from her 4 days ago, and it turns out he's moved in with his boyfriend. He has a boyfriend. She's going to file for divorce before the week is over and consider her next move. Her brother arrives in 2 days to talk with her and stay for the week. With Max's parents' permission, we've changed the locks on the house because, as rumor has it, Max has been using what? I don't know. But all the same, better to be safe. I installed a new chain and a deadbolt. He's never been known to be violent, but he's never been known to vanish for days on end, with the rumor being he's into medications now. When it comes to my relationship with Sherry, we are quietly pursuing a romantic relationship. We're both equally aware that we could just be dealing with our trauma, and these feelings might not be 100% real or lasting. But if I can be allowed to be vain for a moment, it's the best lovemaking I've had in my life. I've never been more physically attracted to any of my previous partners, and I find myself at work daydreaming about her toward the end of the workday. I don't think I've ever had such a strong want for someone before, and all told, she tells me it's something mutual. I've been back to work this week, and both days she stopped by to bring me dinner she made, and that's darn near the cutest thing anyone's ever done for me. Once again, I feel like life is beating the poop out of me at the same time everything is going right.
Growing up in a small town, I was always surrounded by people who knew each other. Family bonds, friendships, and loyalty meant everything. It wasn't until later in life that I realized how fragile those connections could be. My brother Larry and I shared nearly everything, or so I thought. We were twins and looked alike, but we couldn't have been more different. I enjoyed working on mechanical projects, helping out at our father's junkyard, while Larry was more drawn to sales and smooth talking. As time passed, though, life revealed the cracks in relationships we had taken for granted. What I didn't see coming was how those small cracks would eventually grow into a wide chasm between us. My life changed significantly when I married Abigail, a strong, successful woman who had her own career in insurance. We built a home together and seemed to have a perfect marriage. But over time, I began to notice small things, little signs that something was off. Abigail's behavior shifted, and there were moments when I couldn't shake the feeling that my trust was misplaced. I never imagined that this unease would unravel not only my marriage, but also the fragile peace between my brother and me. It's strange how quickly things can change. My whole world turned around the day I went on a fishing trip with a couple of close friends. Meanwhile, my wife Abby was at work when she got a disturbing phone call. "Is this Abigail Bell?" the caller asked. "Yes, speaking. How can I help you?" she replied, confused. "We have your husband. He's been taken hostage and we are demanding a ransom of $250,000. You have 24 hours to get the money or he will be eliminated. Don't involve the police or he dies. Expect another call at 3 p.m. for further instructions." Shocked and terrified, Abby tried to compose herself. "What? Who is this? Is this a joke?" The caller's cold tone left her paralyzed with fear. She had no idea what to do next. I had gone on a fishing trip with some friends to Lake Erie for 3 days, leaving my cell phone behind so we could enjoy the peace. Me and my buddies were on my boat, drinking beer and fishing, having a great time. We didn't get out much, so we were enjoying ourselves. My boat was a decent size, 35 feet, and could comfortably fit 6 people if they were friendly. We rented a cabin nearby to stay in overnight. For the past 6 years, we've done this kind of fishing and camping trip once a year. While I was downing another beer, the Coast Guard sped up to us, stopping next to the boat with their weapons drawn. They asked, "Is one of you Terry Bell?" "That's me," I answered. "What's going on here? Why are you pointing weapons at us?" "Sir, we were told you've been hijacked and held for ransom." "I assure you I'm fine. These are my friends, Joe and Al. They both work for me. We came here to fish for a few days without phones, so we wouldn't be disturbed. Now, could you please lower your weapons?" "Sorry, Mr. Bell. We need to board your boat and take a look around. Do you have any weapons on board?" "Just the usual emergency items like flare weapons. Come aboard." They quickly searched the boat and checked our IDs. Afterward, they apologized, but insisted I come with them. The police needed to speak with me at home. "Joe, Al, you guys keep fishing. I'll try to get back to the cabin tonight or tomorrow. If I don't, make sure the boat's secured and everything's locked up." I left with the Coast Guard and headed to shore. I had met Al and Joe in prison. 12 years ago, I was convicted of receiving stolen property, which I'll explain later. Joe and Al also met in prison while serving time for attack. Each of them had caught their wife cheating and knock up her lover. They could have been charged with attempted homicide, but they took a plea deal for attack. Both divorced afterward. We became good friends and looked out for each other in prison. After my release, I promised to help them when they came up for parole. I served 3 years before getting out. My father owned an auto parts warehouse, where I'd worked since high school, and I took over the business when he got sick and passed away. About a year after my release, Joe and Al were paroled. At the hearing, my dad and I promised them jobs at the warehouse, and Dad mentioned he had trailers near the site where they could live. Because they had jobs and a place to live, they were granted parole 8 years ago. Both thanked my dad and me. They were excellent workers, now they're close friends. Over time, they saved enough to buy used cars and became mechanics and tow truck drivers. They were jacks of all trades and could handle anything at a junkyard. All they needed was a fresh start. They even began dating, eventually married, and bought homes of their own. They were always grateful to my father and me for helping them out. They continued to work for us and were well paid. The police gave me a ride home since I didn't have my car. As soon as I walked in the door, Abby rushed over and hugged me. "Thank God you're okay. I was so worried." "Where have you been?" "On the lake, fishing. That was until the Coast Guard came up to the boat with weapons drawn. What the hell is going on?" A man stepped forward. "I'm Detective Abel. I'm in charge of the case. We need to know where you've been for the past 24 hours. "Nonsense. You dragged me away from my fishing trip, and I want to know why before I say anything." "Fair enough. Your wife called this morning saying she got a call at work claiming you were hijacked and they were demanding a ransom of $250,000. The caller said they would call your house at 3 o'clock. We're all set up and waiting for the call." "This has to be some kind of sick joke. Who the hell would snatch me? I own a damn warehouse and trailer park. What, are they after auto parts or a broken down horse? Abby, did they say anything else?" "They told me I had 24 hours to raise the money, or you'd be eliminated. And if I contacted the police, you would die. They said they'd call at 3 o'clock with further instructions. I was terrified. They said if I called the police, you'd be dead. But I didn't know what to do. So I called anyway. I was so scared." Abby started crying. "Mr. Bell, your wife made the right call. She couldn't handle this alone. That's easy for you to say. It wasn't your damn life at stake. What now? I'm here, I'm fine. Can't you all just leave my house? Mr. Bell, we have to take threats like this seriously. We'll stay and see if the call comes in. Now, can you account for your whereabouts over the last 24 hours? Sure. Joe and Al picked me up early yesterday morning. We rented a cabin by the lake for 4 days. We drove there, took my boat out, and went fishing. We arrived in the evening, cooked dinner, and hung out in the cabin. This morning, we had breakfast, and then the Coast Guard found us. That's it, you know the rest. It was almost 3 o'clock, and the detective had set up a phone beacon in the kitchen. Abby was ready to answer the call, and I sat in the living room with 2 other detectives, drinking coffee. A speakerphone on the coffee table allowed us all to listen. Detective Abel had Abby tell me she'd contacted her lawyer to help get the money, and he would pose as the lawyer if the caller asked. I just sat there shaking my head. Damn it, I could still be fishing, I muttered to the officers. Right at 3 o'clock, the phone rang, and Abby answered. Mrs. Bell, glad to see you made it home early for my call. Is the money ready? The disguised voice asked. Not yet. I contacted a lawyer to help me get the money, Abby replied. What? I told you if you contacted anyone, your husband would be dead. Did you also call the police? No, just a lawyer. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to get that much money. You only told me not to call the police. Please, don't hurt my husband. Put the damn lawyer on the phone. Abby handed the phone to Detective Abel, who played along. This is John Wells, the Bell's attorney. What do you need? We need the money or Bell dies. Is that clear enough for you? If we find out anyone contacted the cops, he's dead. This isn't a damn game. I'm not playing either. Before we give you that kind of money, we need proof you have Mr. Bell and that he's alive. We heard some noise on the other end, then a voice. Abby, it's me, Larry. These masked men grabbed me right after you left the hotel this morning. Please, give them what they want. Then we heard a loud thud, like someone being punched. Damn it, I shouted. That's my loser brother, Larry. What the hell does he mean you were with him this morning? As you can see, sweet Abby, we know you lied to us. Was that your husband in the background? Does he know you've been fooling around with his brother? Looks like we got the wrong Bell. We went to the warehouse yesterday and were told Mr. Bell was on vacation. We stopped by your house and followed you to your hotel. The room was registered to Mr. and Mrs. Bell, so we assumed it was your husband. After you left this morning, we took the wrong Bell. He kept telling us we had the wrong guy until he mentioned having a twin brother. What now that you don't have Terry Bell? The detective asked, still pretending to be the lawyer. $300,000 by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, or Larry Bell dies. The extra money's for the lies and the trouble you caused. We'll call tomorrow morning with drop-off instructions. No more games. The line went dead, and I stood up, furious, yelling at Abby. You cheating strumpet! You've been messing around with my brother? I'm not paying a dime to save him. Let those pricks deal with him. It'll save me the trouble of doing it myself. 2 officers stood between Abby and me, telling me to sit down. I walked over to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and turned on the TV. I want nothing to do with my gigolo brother or my cheating wife. As soon as this is over, we're getting a divorce. The detective asked Abby if what the hijacker said was true, needing to know her every move since she left the house the previous morning. She was upset and crying, but I ignored her. I didn't care anymore. Abby started explaining to the detective, but tried to keep her voice low. I still heard everything. She admitted to meeting Larry at the motel, even though his wife thought he was out of town. They'd been having an affair for months. I felt my anger rising as I realized I had been played. After dinner last night, we went to our room. I'm not going into details about how we made love, Abby said. I cringed. Love-making? Larry never loved anyone. He only wanted you because you were married to me. He didn't care about you, and now neither do I. Abby kept talking, but she was clearly scared of me. She seemed relieved the police were there. We said goodbye in the morning and agreed to meet again in the evening. I went to work to keep things looking normal. That's when I got the call that my husband had been hijacked, and I realized how worried I was about him. I didn't know what to do, so I called the police. That's all I've told you. Did you plan to return to the room tonight? The detective asked, turning away from me. Yes, we had the room for 2 nights. Damn strumpet, I yelled. One of the officers jumped up to restrain me, but I stayed seated. I wasn't about to end up in jail again. Larry and I were twins, but we couldn't have been more different. I liked working with machines, while Larry was always chasing women. We got along as kids only because I let things slide. Whenever I had a girlfriend, Larry always managed to charm her away. He was smoother, more charismatic, and usually dumped them after he got what he wanted. My approach was simple. If the girls wanted Larry that badly, they could have him. I wasn't in love with any of them anyway. Our mother passed away from cancer when we were 18, and we lived with my father until we finished high school. Larry wanted to go to college and become a salesman. He was always good at talking. The only person Larry cared about was himself. I, on the other hand, stayed home to help Dad with the scrap metal business. To most people, it was just junk. But Dad's fortune was over $1 million tied up in inventory. I didn't go to college, choosing instead to help grow the business. Dad was proud of the work we did together. One night at a party, I met a girl, and we started dating. Within a year, we got married, and she moved in with me and Dad. Eventually, Dad gave us the house and moved into one of his trailers to give us more privacy. Over the next few years, my wife Beth and I had 2 children, and life was going well, until Larry came home from college. One day, I saw him flirting with Beth, and that was the breaking point. I slapped him hard and warned him, "If you ever come near her again, I'll destroy you." Beth stayed silent. She knew to keep quiet when I was angry. I had never accused her of anything, but I had my suspicions. Neither she nor Larry denied what I said that day. After that, we didn't see much of each other. Larry kept his distance from Beth and took a job as a traveling sales rep for a window and siding company. His job allowed him to meet plenty of women. He had the gift of gab and always found a way into the lives of wealthy women. He lived off them until he moved on to the next one. His job didn't pay for the lifestyle he wanted, but he got by because of the women he dated. It's been 12 years since I married Beth. We had a solid marriage, though I always had my doubts. We had 2 wonderful children, and because of them, I didn't dwell on the possibility of cheating. Around that time, my father's health started to decline after a stroke. I reached out to Larry asking if he wanted to join the salvage business, but he just laughed, saying he wanted nothing to do with it. Dad was disappointed, but I assured him I would always be there for him. One day, a man came to us with several cars he wanted to sell. Dad made an under-the-table deal, which wasn't the first time he'd done that to avoid paying extra taxes. Unfortunately, he didn't check the VIN numbers on the cars. A few days later, law enforcement showed up with a search warrant. The man had told the police he'd dumped the cars in our lot, and they were preparing to arrest my dad for receiving stolen property. There was no way I was letting Dad go to jail. I stepped forward to speak with the agents. "Sir, I took those cars. My father had no idea. I was planning to handle the registration, but didn't get the chance. All they needed was someone to arrest, and that someone was me." I was arrested, pleaded guilty, and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. My father was heartbroken and promised he'd do anything for me. I hugged him, and he tearfully apologized. The day I was taken away, I realized my dad wouldn't survive prison. He already had a weak heart, and I couldn't bear the thought of him dying alone in there. Beth left me and filed for divorce 2 months after I went to prison. She said she didn't want to live alone, and of course, she took the kids with her. She soon started dating an insurance agent and married him a few months later. Losing my kids hurt, but I said to hell with her. I kept in touch with my father through letters, and he visited me every month. Several of his cousins helped him run the salvage business while I was locked up. I couldn't do much from prison, but at least Dad trusted his cousins who were a bit younger than him. In prison, I met Al and Joe. They seemed like decent guys. Both of them had caught their wives with lovers and knocked them so badly the men had to be hospitalized. I could relate. I almost did the same to my own brother. I promised them that when they got out on parole, I'd help them however I could. I even talked to my father, and he agreed to hire them when the time came. After serving 3 years of my 5-year sentence, I was released. I was glad to be free and to help my father again. He made me part owner of the business, telling me that when he passed, it would be mine, and Larry would have no claim to it. His cousins were running things well, so we kept them on. Dad joked that they worked a little harder once I got back, which made us both smile. The following year, we hired Al and Joe, fulfilling the promise I made to them. They were grateful to us and said they always would be. Several years passed, and things were going well. Business was booming, and I made sure every vehicle that came through was inspected thoroughly. I wasn't going back to jail. One day, I rushed my father to the hospital after he had a heart attack. I called Larry, and he made it in time to say goodbye before Dad died. As promised, I inherited the rest of the business, the trailer park, and the house where I had lived with Beth and Dad. Larry got Dad's savings, stocks, and bonds, about $300,000, and left happy. He had recently married a wealthy widow named Cora, who owned a real estate business with her late husband. Cora was smart enough to have a prenup to protect her fortune. She was successful, intelligent, and attractive, though I think loneliness drew her to Larry. She could have done so much better. It was at one of Cora and Larry's parties where I met my current wife, Abigail. Abby was beautiful, with a great figure and legs. She could have easily been another one of Larry's conquests, but she was friends with Cora. Abby had been married and divorced twice, with no kids. She worked at an insurance office in downtown Cleveland. Abby and I started dating regularly, and soon we decided to get married. I incorporated the salvage business to protect it from anyone trying to claim it. Abby brought $400,000 into the marriage, and I didn't mind getting an advance on it. She believed we'd be together for life, even though she'd been married twice before. I didn't mind either. In fact, the prenup protected my assets too. I knew her savings came from her exes. I cared for her, but I'm not sure I'd call it love. I've always had too many questions to fully trust anyone. After I got out of prison, Beth agreed to let me see my children. I was pleased that they still called me dad, and I was part of their lives. I was even helping both of them go to college. Life was good. Business was thriving. Al and Joe were my best friends, and I saw them often. I was married to a beautiful woman. Things were better than ever. A couple of months ago, Abby started acting strange. I chalked it up to something women go through and didn't think much of it, though I kept my guard up. I had no reason to believe she'd cheat on me. I told her I was going on a fishing trip with Joe and Al like we'd done for the past 6 years. We wouldn't have our cell phones, and I told her if there was an emergency, she could always contact the Coast Guard. So far, that had never happened. The detective was talking to his tech team, hoping to trace the phone number from the call. The caller had been on the line long enough. "Have we located the phone?" the detective asked. "Yes, sir, but it's not a solid trace. The caller used a prepaid track phone, disposable. You can add minutes, but they're hard to trace. I tracked the number, but all it tells me is that it was bought at a Walmart. Could have been purchased anywhere. The tower that picked up the call is in downtown Cleveland." "Can we narrow it down?" the detective asked. "Not really, just within a 5-mile radius of downtown Cleveland." "Which isn't much, sir." "Send 2 officers to the motel and see if we can find out anything," the detective ordered. "Mrs. Bell, we'll need the name of the motel and your room number. Maybe someone saw something or a lobby camera picked up some footage. Also, check if Larry Bell's car is still in the parking lot." Abby gave the officer the info he asked for, including Larry's car make. She grew worried and asked about the ransom. I stepped in. "I'm not paying a dime. If you want him, you can cover the ransom yourself. Also, we should tell Cora since her husband's been hijacked." "No, we can't tell her," Abby said. "Actually, Mrs. Bell, we do need to speak with her," Detective Abel said. "It's her husband. She has the right to know." "Let me call her," I suggested. "She can come here and you can talk to her." "Fine, but get her here fast," the detective replied. I called Cora. "Hey, Cora, it's Terry. Can you come over? We need to talk." "Terry, is this about Larry? He was supposed to be in Pittsburgh, but he's not there. Do you know where he is?" Cora asked. "No, I don't. The detective needs to speak with you in person, so please come quickly," I said. 15 minutes later, Cora arrived. I met her at the door and brought her into the living room. "What's happening? Where's Larry? Is he okay?" she asked, worried. "Mrs. Bell," the detective started. "Just call me Cora. There are 2 Mrs. Bells here," she interrupted. "Where's Abby?" "She went to the bathroom," I said. "Cora, what did you mean when you said Larry wasn't in Pittsburgh?" the detective asked. "Do you know where he is? Why won't anyone tell me anything?" Cora trembled. I looked her in the eye. "Cora, Larry's been hijacked. They thought it was me but took him by mistake. He's alive, but they're asking for a ransom." Cora gasped. "Oh my God, why would they snatch him, or you?" "We need to know everything that's happened recently," the detective said. "We spoke to Larry briefly, and we know he's alive. We're trying to find him." Cora looked uneasy, but agreed to help. "I've been suspecting Larry of cheating. He went to Pittsburgh for a home show and said he was sharing a motel room to save money. He's done it before, but this time he seemed different." "What made you think he was cheating?" the detective asked. "He's been distant, avoiding closeness and disappearing more often. I hired a private investigator to follow him. He left yesterday, but when he checked into the motel, the investigator found another man in his room. Larry wasn't there." "A private investigator?" I cut in. "I needed to know. It cost me $1,000, but it was worth it if it proved anything. This morning, the investigator told me Larry never showed up, so he returned half the money." Just then, Abby came in, eyes red from crying. Cora rushed over to hug her, but Abby held her hands up. "What's going on?" Cora demanded. "Why is my husband being held for ransom, and why is my best friend avoiding me? What aren't you telling me, Terry? You've never lied to me." I handed her a beer and told her to sit. I explained everything, including how they mistakenly took Larry instead of me. "The reason they confused us," I added, "is because my wife was having an affair with your husband." "What?" Cora shouted. "Larry and Abby are having an affair?" Turning to Abby, Cora snapped, "You lied to me, comforted me, and now I find out you're the one cheating with him." Cora started crying, and I hugged her until she calmed down. Detective Abel then asked if she had more to add. "He gambled a lot and lost money," Cora said. "I don't know if that's why they wanted Terry." The detective turned to me. "Do you have any enemies or know anyone who'd want to snatch you? I'm worth a lot on paper, but I can't get that kind of money quickly. My brother probably set this up. He's been sleeping with Abby and knows she has access to money." Abby shouted, "He didn't do this. He loves me. And we were going to leave together. You're just jealous. You two-faced witch," Cora yelled. "He's all yours. He even took money from my account. I'm done with him." Detective Abel intervened, trying to calm everyone. "We still need to find Larry and the hijackers. Can either of you get the $300,000? Cora looked desperate. "I only have a couple $100,000 left. He's still my husband until I divorce him. Don't spend another dime on him, I said. He's been using you. Let Abby deal with it. Abby snapped. That would wipe me out. You two don't care at all, do you? I muttered. He cheated on me with you. If you want to save him, do it yourself. Cora, I'll file for divorce before you on Monday. Bring me coffee, I joked. Cora stayed silent, her eyes filled with tears. Detective Abel sent 2 officers with Abby to get the ransom money, nearly all of her savings. When they returned, I stood up. I'm leaving, I said. You can't, the detective replied. Either arrest me or I'm going fishing. Call me if you need me for the funeral, I said coldly. Cora told them she couldn't stay because of Abby and would go to her own house. The detective arranged for a security guard to watch her home and promised to keep her updated. I turned to Abby. I'll stay at the cabin for a few more days. Once you get your lover back, I expect you to move out of my house. It's mine now. Detective Abel didn't know what to do with me. He walked me to my car, reminding me to stay alert since I was supposedly the original target. Thanks, but I doubt it, I said, driving off to the cabin. Later, Al and Joe came back with pizza and beer, and I told them what had happened. The next morning, I went fishing, waving at the Coast Guard, who I suspected were keeping an eye on me. We made sure to make it easy for them, blasting the foghorn when we passed by again. Around 3 a.m., a car pulled into my driveway as Al and Joe were getting out. Al in my car and Joe in his. Detective Abel and 2 other detectives, all in suits, stepped out. You don't look like you're here for camping or fishing, Abel said. Where are your friends headed? I explained. I was going to rent the cabin a few more days. They're picking up their families to stay. We all came in Joe's car and I lent mine to Al. So why are you here? Did you save my wonderful brother? Abel responded, We found your brother. He was shaken up, but he'll be fine. I don't think he was involved in the hijacking. I've known him all my life and I'm sticking to my theory, I said. Want a Coke or something? A Coke would be nice. Can we look around the cabin? Abel asked. Sure, come in. It's messy from breakfast, but we'll clean before they get back with their wives, I joked. As they came in, Abel filled me in on what happened after I left. The detectives questioned the motel clerk, who said someone asked for the Bell's room, but didn't get a good look at him. Larry and Abby's room had a back exit by the pool. Larry was likely taken through that door. No one saw anything, but Larry's car was still in the parking lot, and most of his stuff, including his wallet, was left behind, minus cash and credit cards. The other detectives joined us, and I brought snacks. Abel continued. The hijackers called at 9 a.m. asking for the lawyer to hand over the ransom. The drop was in a dangerous part of town, so we couldn't let Abby go. So, my wife used her savings to pay the ransom for my brother, her lover? I asked. Yes, but we usually get the money back 80% of the time, Abel replied. So, Larry's safe, but you lost the money, I said. Yes, we lost track of the money. The hijackers had a well-planned operation. You mentioned they, so it was more than one person? According to your brother, after Abby left the motel, 2 masked men knocked him down, injected him with something, and he woke up in a dark, windowless room. He had water but no food and was lying on an old mattress. I know you think he set this up, but I can't see him doing this to himself, Abel explained. Detective Abel continued. Larry was told to bring a suitcase of money to an abandoned shopping center. The area looked like a war zone. There was an old green Chevy in a garage. Larry had to place the suitcase in the trunk, take the key, and leave. The hijackers said they had another key and would call with Larry's location after checking the money. When Larry protested, they threatened to eliminate him if the money wasn't delivered by 10 o'clock. We didn't like it, but we agreed and planned to watch the car. Jim and Bob hid nearby with binoculars, keeping an eye on the building and car. We waited until noon, but no one showed up. I was worried something went wrong, but the tracker showed the suitcase was still in the car. Then Mrs. Bell got a call with Larry's location. He was 2 houses down, locked in an old loan office or vault. The lock was welded shut, so Jim had to break it with a sledgehammer. We found Larry in his underwear, dehydrated and using a bucket for a toilet. He had no idea who hijacked him, just 2 masked men. They were angry when they realized they had mistaken him for you. I asked, what happened to Abby's money? Didn't you say the suitcase was still in the car? That's the crazy part, Abel said. When Bob opened the trunk, the suitcase was there, but the money was gone. The car had a false bottom, and the money was taken through a hole leading to the sewer. We found where the person exited, about 100 yards away, but no leads on who it was. Larry was taken to the hospital, dirty and shaken, but okay. I followed your wife there. Jim and Bob stayed at the scene but found no clues. We had the Chevy towed for inspection, but I doubt we'll find anything. Did you tell Cora? I asked. Yes, she thanked us, but told Larry she's filing for divorce. She was glad he was safe, but that was the end for her, Abel replied. The detectives stood up to leave, and I thanked them for the update. I wanted nothing to do with my brother. The best thing he could do was stay away from me. Before leaving, Abel asked if I had any idea who might have tried to snatch me. Detective, I run a scrap metal recycling center. I was with my best friends and my cousins were running the warehouse. Abby might have hired someone, but what would she gain? I bought her everything she wanted. My brother, though, he's always after money. My bet is still on him. Some time passed before Al and Joe arrived with their families. Everyone seemed happy, though things were a little awkward because they knew about Abby. She had never been close with any of them. I told the guys I was feeling a bit down and planned to stay at a motel for a couple of days. I encouraged them to enjoy the cabin and my boat, and I trusted them completely with everything I owned. They were true friends. I promised to be back in 2 days to dock the boat and close up the cabin. I told them to enjoy their vacation, and I'd see them at work on Monday. I figured some peace and quiet would do me good, giving me time to think about my next steps. I called Cora and invited her to dinner the next day, and she agreed. I met Cora the following day. She looked beautiful but sad, dressed in her usual business attire since she worked in real estate. We met at Red Lobster, arriving separately. "Why did you want to have dinner, Terry?" she asked. "The last few days have been rough, and I thought we could both use a friend. So, did you see my a-hole brother yesterday?" "Yeah, I got there just after Abby left," she said. "I can't believe a friend would do that to me. I never want to see her again. Larry tried to apologize, but I told him to go to hell. That was it for me. First he steals from me, then he cheats on me with Abby. I told him I'm filing for divorce on Monday, and if he fights it, I'll press theft charges for forging my name and taking money from my savings." "God, I can't believe I ever married him. I feel like such an idiot for staying with him," she added. "He's always been a smooth talker. I hoped he'd changed when he married you, but clearly he hasn't. I'm seeing a lawyer on Monday too. If you want to come with me, that's fine," I said. She smiled. "Your brother may be a talker, but you've always been a kind man, willing to help anyone. Larry has always been jealous of you, but you probably knew that already." "What did he say about the hijacking? Did he admit to setting it up?" I asked. Cora chuckled. "He claimed he had nothing to do with it. He said they were after you but didn't know why. They were furious when they realized they had the wrong bell." "I'm still confused about all of this. Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked. "Let's leave it at that for now," she replied. "Talking about Larry makes me sick. How about we go see a lawyer together? Maybe grab lunch afterward?" I said softly. "Cora, I've always cared about you. It's a shame I picked the wrong brother, but I didn't know you then. We each have to deal with our divorces now. Some might even think we faked the hijacking to be together," she laughed. "But that doesn't mean we can't have dinner or lunch once in a while." I loved spending time with her. She was kind, genuine, and easy to talk to. I had thought about her many times, but never admitted my feelings. We were both married and respected our vows. After the divorces, I hoped things would change. When I returned to the cabin on Sunday, Al and Joe, or maybe their wives, had already cleaned up. They thanked me repeatedly for letting them use the boat. I told them they could use it any time. The wives even gave me hugs. Al and Joe had already returned the boat, tied it up, and locked everything. I said goodbye to Joe and his family, telling them I'd see them tomorrow, though I'd be late because I had to stop by the lawyer's office. I gave Al and his family a ride home since they didn't have a car with them. On Sunday evening, I called Abby from the motel and told her, "I hope you're packing because I'll be home Monday after work and you'd better be gone or you'll regret it." It was a threat, but I didn't care. I wasn't sure I'd actually do anything, but I was definitely going to throw her out. She wanted to talk about money and divorce. I told her, "It's all in the prenup. You'll get what you came in with and the house, and almost everything in it stays with me." When she said most of her money was gone because she gave it to Larry, I replied, "You can thank my brother for that. Talk to him. Maybe he can return some of the money." She got angry. "You're a horrible, pathetic person. You would let your brother die." I cut her off. I didn't do anything. If he hadn't been fooling around with my wife, I might have helped him. Anyway, I'm seeing a lawyer on Monday. You'll be served with divorce papers later this week. I suggest you sign them. After I returned from the lawyer's office on Monday, I got a call from Cora at work. Larry stopped by my office to pick up his things from the house. He had a small trailer, and I told him he better take only what belonged to him. He tried to apologize again, but I told him to just leave. I'll be mailing the divorce papers to his company's office in Youngstown. "As he was leaving," she continued, "I saw Abby in a car following Larry. I think she rented a truck. My idiot brother helped her move her stuff. Cora told me she had scared Larry by telling him, 'I had dinner with Terry on Saturday, and he said if he ever saw you again, you'd be a dead man.' I never said that, but Cora told me it scared the hell out of Larry," she added. Cora told me she also informed Detective Abel that she had canceled all of Larry's credit cards, both those in his name and the ones they shared. She was done paying his bills and mentioned that Abel was keeping an eye out for any activity on the stolen cards. The case wouldn't be closed until the hijackers were caught, and hopefully the money recovered. Since Larry had been found, the case had been put on the back burner. Work slowly returned to normal. Cora and I started having dinner at least twice a week. We both filed for divorce, and the lawyers said it would take about 90 days. We were both surprised that neither Abby nor Larry contested the divorce. Contesting would have been pointless since we both had prenuptial agreements. Over the next month, Cora and I grew closer. She confided in me about things she hadn't shared before. A few months earlier, Larry had traveled to Las Vegas and forged her name to withdraw over $100,000. She only found out when she saw a bank statement, right as Larry was supposed to be on a 2-day trip to Pittsburgh. At first, she just wanted to confront him. But then she wanted to know why he had done it. She suspected the money went to cover gambling debts and wondered if he had another woman. Cora asked me to check on Abby and Larry's schedules, and it turned out they'd both been out of town that weekend. Abby had gone to Iowa to visit her sister. I was more annoyed than ever and told Cora that I needed some payback. But I knew I had to wait. Too little time had passed since the hijacking. Later, we found out that Abby and Larry were living together just outside Cleveland. They were renting an apartment, still working, but we didn't know if they were happy. Cora suggested I leave it alone. "It's over," she said. Cora mentioned that Larry thought I was a fool for going to jail to protect my father. "There's no way he would have done that," she said. Cora told me she thought it was a beautiful and heroic act to protect my sick father. I realized I was falling in love with her. I loved being around her, and she made me feel at home. I asked, "Cora, when our divorces are final, would you marry me?" We hadn't even made love yet, but I meant it, I confessed. "Terry, are you sure you want to do this? I'm probably not the best lover considering my husband wants another woman," she replied, but she smiled and didn't say no. "Our divorces will be finalized next month," I said. "Let's celebrate, spend the night together, and then you can decide." "I already know how I feel," I told her. I had no doubt about my feelings. Being around her made me happy. A month later, we both received our divorce papers in the same week. Cora said she wanted to get away for the weekend with me. I decided to take her to Pittsburgh and booked us a stay at the Sheraton Inn, a great spot to explore the city. We left on Friday, driving through Youngstown, crossing the Ohio River into West Virginia, and then reaching Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I stopped in Youngstown for gas and used my credit card. Then I made a large deposit in the overnight box at Chase Bank, telling Cora, "I meant to deposit this before leaving, but since it's the same bank, I'll drop it off here. It's too much money to carry around." We had dinner at the Sheraton, and it was wonderful to be with her. After dinner and a few drinks, we went up to the room and made love. The next morning, we explored the city, visiting the Carnegie Institute, a museum. Later, we decided to catch a baseball game. We weren't Pirates fans, being from Cleveland, but we acted like kids and had a blast. We went out for dinner again, then returned to the hotel for cocktails and some dancing. It was just nice being together. I couldn't believe my brother had cheated on a woman like Cora. She was beautiful, fun, wonderful, and a great lover, everything I could want in a girlfriend or wife. The next day, we headed back to Cleveland, passing through Steubenville and a few small Amish towns. We stopped to do some shopping and sightseeing along the way. I dropped Cora off at her house and told her I'd like to see her Monday after work. On Monday, she cooked us dinner. She was an amazing cook, too. After we finished eating, there was a knock at the door. Cora answered it. It was Detective Abel. "Mrs. Bell, may I come in? I have a few questions for you." "Of course, come in," she said. "Terry, Detective Abel is here," she called. I walked into the room, and Abel looked a little surprised to see me. "Before you say anything," I started, "Cora and I have been seeing each other. This only started after we both found out about our exes cheating." "You're both adults. What you do is your business," Abel said. "I have a few questions about the credit cards you canceled that were stolen. Do you still have a list?" "Yes, it's in the desk. I'll get it," Cora replied. She handed the list to Detective Abel. "What's this about?" Cora asked. "I noticed you canceled the Chase card you both used. Is that right?" "Yes, why?" she asked. "Your husband had another Chase card he used last Friday at a gas station in Youngstown. Larry was at his corporate office in Youngstown on Friday. He said he didn't use that card and that it was stolen. I only canceled the cards I had duplicates of. I didn't know he had another Chase card," Cora explained. "Was my name on that card?" "No," Abel said. "He claimed it was his alone. He ordered a new card but hadn't used it. So, what do you want from me?" "I just need to confirm the cards you canceled. That's all you can do," Cora said. "It sounds like Larry's problem, not mine." "You're right," Abel agreed. "But I needed to check. That card wasn't just used for gas. It was also used for an overnight deposit. Someone put $100,000 into an account that already had $75,000. "What?" I asked, shocked. "Someone put $100,000 into Larry's savings account? Who else could have done that but Larry himself? Did you ask him?" "Yes," Abel replied. "He didn't have much to say. Your ex-wife was there demanding to know where the money came from and why he didn't tell her about the $75,000. Larry just clammed up and refused to answer. You may be right about your brother, Mr. Bell, Abel continued, but we can't prove anything. We're just tracking the stolen cards. Larry claimed this card wasn't stolen, but he was uncertain when he gave me the list. After Abel left, Cora looked at me, her eyes filled with questions. I knew she wanted to talk, so I decided to be straightforward. Cora, are you going to marry me? I asked. Terry, I care about you. I really do, she said softly. But I have one big problem. What's that? I asked. I'm sure we can work through it. It's about the hijacking, Cora said. I have a feeling you know more than you've told me. If we get married, I need to be able to trust you. I've been married twice, and both my husbands lied to me, not just about cheating. I don't want that again. I smiled, though I felt a pang of guilt. Why do you think I know more? Terry, we were in Youngstown on Friday, she said calmly. You got gas and stopped at Chase Bank to make a deposit. I know you well enough to tell when you're hiding something. Did you find out about Abby and Larry and stage this hijacking so I'd see what kind of man Larry really is? I hesitated, but I knew I owed her the truth. So, what do you want to know? If I knew about it, if I was involved? I just want the truth, she said. I need to be able to trust you, and you can trust me. You made that deposit knowing I'd question it. You were sending me a message, weren't you? It was a big step for me, a step toward trust that I rarely took. Aside from Al and Joe, I hadn't fully trusted anyone else. But Cora was right. If we were going to be together, we needed to trust each other completely. All right, I said, deciding to come clean. I'll tell you everything. One of my best clients thought he saw me in Las Vegas. He said he approached a guy who looked like my twin, hugging a woman as if she were his mistress. My client greeted him with, "How the hell are you doing, you stupid son of a witch?" The guy got mad and told him to back off. That's when my client realized it wasn't me. I continued. I showed him a picture of Abby and asked if that was the woman he saw. He said yes, and I told him it was my twin brother and his wife. He then said, damn, he was all over her like newlyweds. I played along, but I knew the truth. After that, I called Abby's sister and found out she hadn't been to Las Vegas. So I knew Abby went with Larry, and I figured you paid for the trip. I had paid for her airfare, thinking she was going to her sister's. Cora's expression tightened as I went on. I checked Abby's savings, and she hadn't withdrawn any money for the trip. That's when I decided to get even. I asked a few close friends for help. The rest is history. You would have let him die? Cora asked, her voice trembling. Of course not, I said. But I wanted him to suffer. I can't stand him, but he's still my brother. I just hoped you wouldn't help bail him out. I was surprised Abby gave the money, but I'm sure she thought she'd get it back once the hijackers were caught. Why did you give Larry money on Friday? She asked, still processing. I got rid of all his cards except for the one in his name after you mentioned you'd canceled the rest. I checked the balance. It was $75,000, likely what he took from you. I used it to buy gas so Detective Abel would know the card had been used. Then I deposited the money into his account. Larry's so greedy he'd never admit someone else put that money there, and I knew it would create doubt between him and Abby. She'll always wonder if it's her money. I laughed bitterly. There's no way he can explain that kind of cash. Cora stared at me, her expression unreadable. What did you do with the rest of the money? I didn't need any of it. I bought stock in my company for the two friends who helped me. $50,000 each. They now own about 4% of the company. I told them to hold on to it for now. They're happy to have a stake in the business. The remaining $100,000 is for you, the money Larry stole. I thought you could put it in the real estate account. Cora didn't know what to say. I had essentially hijacked her husband for her benefit, told her the truth, and didn't take any money for myself. She knew I did it to get back at both Abby and Larry, but I had also helped her. Well, that's everything, I said. It's up to you whether you trust me. I love you, Cora, and I want you in my life, and I promise not to lie to you. Cora looked at me for a long time, then kissed me softly. She took my hand, led me to the bedroom, and we made love. We decided to rent a cabin and have a small private wedding. It was a beautiful setting by the lake, with nature's calm all around us. Al, Joe, their families, and the rest of my staff were there. Cora's parents attended, and I finally met her sister and a few other relatives. Some of her real estate employees were also there. It was too cold to swim, but everyone enjoyed a boat ride, and we all appreciated the peaceful surroundings. No one mentioned Abby or Larry, and nothing was said about the hijacking, but I saw Cora hugging Al and Joe, realizing who my true friends were. The wedding was filled with food, music, and the warmth of family and friends. Cora's parents were surprised by how much I looked like Larry, but she quickly explained that he was my twin. After everyone left, Cora and I took a moonlit boat ride, just the two of us. It was peaceful, romantic, and the perfect way to begin our new life together. We spent 4 days at the cabin, fishing and simply enjoying each other's company. There were no distractions or drama. and it felt like we were finally free from the complications of the past. Cora and I had a business arrangement for our future. I owned my parts warehouse, and she owned her real estate business. Everything else we shared. We decided to sell both our houses and bought a condo together for a fresh start. It was wonderful coming home to her. Sometimes we went out for dinner, other times we stayed in. Cora bonded quickly with Al and Joe's wives, who became her best friends. Since Cora couldn't have children, we often watched their kids. They started calling us Aunt Cora and Uncle Terry, and it felt like we had built a new family around us. Eventually, we even considered adoption. From what we've heard, Larry and Abby aren't together anymore. Larry apparently moved out of state, which suited me fine. Cora mentioned seeing Abby a few times during business trips. She's gained weight and is seeing someone at her insurance firm, Cora said, but they never spoke. Abby would just shake her head whenever she saw Cora. We never heard back from Detective Abel, so I assumed the hijacking case is closed. I didn't care anymore. I had moved on. Cora and I were happy, and nothing else mattered. Our business was thriving, and the friends who helped with the hijacking were now part owners of the company, strengthening our bond. Life was good. Cora and I made a great team, both in life and in business. One day, as we sat in our condo, Cora looked at me and asked, "Terry, do you ever wonder what might have happened if things had gone differently with Larry, Abby, everything?" I paused for a moment. Sometimes, I admitted. But then I remember that everything led us to this moment, and I wouldn't change a thing. She smiled, took my hand, and said, "Me neither." We leaned back, watching the sunset over the city, knowing we had overcome life's challenges together. And that was all that really mattered.
Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We're so glad you're here. We've got an incredible story lined up for you today, and we hope it keeps you on the edge of your seat. Let's jump right into the story. Preston Fowler's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel as he navigated through the congested streets of downtown. At 45, the architect had built a reputation for innovative, sustainable designs, but today his mind was consumed by the eco-friendly skyscraper project that was eating up his time and sanity in equal measure. As he pulled into the driveway of his suburban home, the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. The front door swung open before he could reach for his keys. Jessica, his wife of 20 years, practically bounced out to greet him, her enthusiasm seeming oddly out of place. "Preston, darling, you're home early," she chirped, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that made him pause. He glanced at his watch. "It's past 8, Jess." "Oh, is it?" She laughed, the sound a touch too high. "I guess I lost track of time. How was your day?" Preston raised an eyebrow, curiosity momentarily overriding his exhaustion. "Same as always. Meetings, revisions, more meetings. You seem chipper." Jessica's smile widened. "I have a surprise for you," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. "A surprise?" Preston echoed, his fatigue-addled brain struggling to keep up. "Meet me at the Regal Hotel tomorrow at 7 p.m. Don't be late." The enthusiasm in her voice felt off, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. But Preston, his mind still half occupied with work concerns, simply nodded. "All right," he said, stepping past her into the house. "I'll be there. Now, if you don't mind, I need a shower." As the hot water pounded against his back, Preston's thoughts drifted. Their marriage had been distant lately, true. The passion that once burned between them had cooled to embers. But he'd been working hard, building a future for them both. Surely Jessica understood that? He stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around his waist. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Probably already asleep, he thought. Or pretending to be. He sighed, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The next evening, Preston arrived at the Regal Hotel precisely at 7 p.m., a bouquet of roses in hand. The concierge, a young man with a polite smile, directed him to a suite on the top floor. "Enjoy your evening, sir," the concierge said, a hint of knowing in his voice that made Preston's skin prickle. As the elevator ascended, a mix of anticipation and unease settled in his stomach. What was Jessica playing at? Was this her way of rekindling their romance? He knocked on the suite door, straightening his tie with his free hand. The door swung open to reveal Jessica, but she wasn't alone. A man Preston had never seen before stood behind her, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Hello, Preston," Jessica said, her voice devoid of warmth. "You're right on time. Always so dependable." Preston's eyes darted between Jessica and the stranger. What's going on here, Jess? Jessica's lips curled into a cruel smile. Meet Antonio, my high school sweetheart. Your surprise is this. I'm leaving you. Preston stood frozen, his mind refusing to process the words. Antonio sauntered forward, draping his arm around Jessica's waist. Thanks for keeping her warm for me. Chump, Antonio sneered, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. Jessica's eyes, once warm and loving, now held only cold contempt. She tossed an envelope at Preston's feet. Divorce papers. I've already transferred your retirement funds to my account. She paused, savoring the shock on Preston's face. Oh, and here's a one-way ticket to Alaska. Why don't you go cool off? The roses slipped from Preston's grasp, scattering across the plush hotel carpet. He stared at the fallen flowers, his mind reeling. You can't be serious, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Antonio laughed, the sound grating on Preston's nerves. Oh, she's dead serious, buddy. You snooze, you lose. Preston's shock began to give way to anger. He took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. You think you can just throw away 20 years of marriage? For this high school fling? Jessica's eyes narrowed. Watch it, Preston. Don't make a scene. It's over. Accept it and move on. Move on. Preston's voice rose. You've stolen my money, my future, and you expect me to just move on? Antonio stepped between them, his chest puffed out. You heard the lady. It's over. Now why don't you take that ticket and disappear? Before things get unpleasant. Preston's eyes locked with Jessica's. For a moment, he searched for any sign of the woman he'd loved for 2 decades. He found nothing but cold indifference. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and steady. Both of you. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the roses scattered on the floor behind him. Days blurred together as Preston grappled with the betrayal. He found himself sitting in his lawyer's office, the tasteful decor a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Cameron Schneider, a sharp-eyed attorney with a reputation for ruthlessness in divorce cases, reviewed the situation. Preston, I've got good news and bad news, Cameron said, leaning back in his leather chair. The good news is, the transfer of your retirement funds was illegal. We can sue for fraud. Preston leaned forward, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. And the bad news? Cameron's expression turned grim. Jessica's filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She's moving fast, trying to get ahead of us. Preston's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening. She's the one with differences, like preferring her high school fling to her husband of 2 decades. I understand you're angry, Preston, Cameron said, his tone measured. But we need to approach this strategically. Emotion won't win this battle. Preston nodded, forcing himself to take a deep breath. You're right. What's our next move? Cameron pulled out a file, spreading documents across his desk. We counterfile, citing adultery. It won't stop the divorce, but it could affect the division of assets. Do it, Preston said without hesitation. Cameron nodded, then hesitated. There's more. Jessica's visa is tied to your marriage. If we report the fraud, it'll be canceled. A glimmer of resolve sparked in Preston's eyes. He leaned forward, his voice low and determined. Do it. And Cameron? I want everything we can legally throw at them. Cameron's lips curled into a predatory smile. Consider it done. We'll hit them so hard they won't know what hit them. As Preston stood to leave, Cameron called out, Preston, one more thing. Don't contact Jessica or that Antonio character. Let them think you're licking your wounds. The element of surprise will be our best weapon. Preston nodded, a smile spreading across his face. Don't worry, Cameron. I've got no interest in talking to either of them. But they'll hear from me soon enough. Preston threw himself into his work, channeling his pain and anger into the skyscraper project. His colleagues noticed the change, the increased intensity in his eyes, the longer hours he put in, but no one dared to mention it. Late one evening, as he was leaving the office, a conversation between 2 junior architects caught his attention. Did you hear about that international competition? One of them asked, excitement evident in his voice. Yeah, the Sustainable City Project, right? The other replied. The prize is huge. Preston slowed his pace, listening intently. But there's a catch, the first one continued. You need to work with a partner from a developing country. Seriously? That's going to make things complicated. Preston paused, an idea forming. He turned back, startling the 2 younger men. Tell me more about this competition, he said, his tone brooking no argument. 20 minutes later, Preston was back at his desk, furiously researching. Hours ticked by as he scoured the internet, looking for the perfect partner. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across his office, he stumbled upon a promising lead. A talented but unknown architect in Jessica's home country. A smile spread across Preston's face. "Two birds, one stone," he muttered, reaching for his phone to make travel arrangements. As he booked his flight, Preston's mind raced with possibilities. This wasn't just about winning a competition anymore. It was about rebuilding his life and exacting justice. Jessica and Antonio had tried to break him, but they'd only succeeded in unleashing a side of him they never knew existed. He pulled up Jessica's social media profiles, noting with disgust the lovey-dovey photos she'd already posted with Antonio. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he muttered, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, he considered leaving a scathing comment. But no, that would tip his hand. Instead, he closed the browser and pulled up his email. He had work to do, plans to make. Jessica and Antonio thought they'd won, that they'd left him broken and defeated. They couldn't be more wrong. Preston Fowler, the mild-mannered architect, was gone. In his place stood a man determined to not just survive, but to thrive, and to make those who betrayed him pay dearly for their mistakes. As the first rays of sunlight crept through his office window, Preston allowed himself a moment of reflection. The pain of betrayal still burned, but it was fuel now, driving him forward. He'd trusted too easily, loved too blindly. Never again. He picked up the phone, dialing Cameron's number. It was early, but he knew his lawyer would be up. "Cameron? It's Preston. I need you to do something for me." The stale air of the airplane cabin did little to clear Preston's head as he touched down in Jessica's home country. The 14-hour flight had given him ample time to stew in his anger, to plot his next moves. As he stepped off the plane, he straightened his tie and set his jaw. This wasn't just a business trip. This was war. Preston's contact, a local architect named Maureen, was waiting for him at the arrival's gate. She was younger than he expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Fowler?" she asked, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. Preston nodded, shaking her hand. "Call me Preston. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, Maureen." They made their way to a nearby cafe, the bustle of the airport fading into background noise. As they sat down with their coffees, Maureen got straight to the point. "Your email was intriguing," she said, her eyes studying Preston's face. "But I have to ask, why me? You're already successful. You could partner with anyone for this competition." Preston took a sip of his coffee, buying himself a moment to choose his words carefully. He'd prepared for this question, knew he needed to strike the right balance between honesty and strategy. "Your designs are revolutionary," he said, meeting her gaze. "I've been following your work for a while now. The way you integrate local materials and traditional techniques into modern, sustainable structures. It's exactly what this competition is looking for." Maureen's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Mr. Fowler. What's the real reason?" Preston's lips twitched in a hint of a smile. He appreciated her directness. "All right, cards on the table. I'm going through a personal upheaval. My wife left me, tried to clean out my accounts. I need this win, both professionally and personally. And I believe that together, we could not only win this competition but change the face of sustainable architecture." He watched as Maureen processed this information, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "And what do I get out of this, besides a chance at a prize that's not guaranteed?" "Exposure," Preston said without hesitation. "Win or lose, you'll be working with one of the top firms in sustainable design. It's a foot in the door of an industry that, let's face it, isn't always welcoming to women, especially in this part of the world." Maureen's eyes narrowed, but Preston could see the spark of interest there. "You've done your homework," she said. Preston nodded. "I believe in being prepared. So, what do you say? Partners?" Maureen was silent for a long moment, her fingers tapping a rhythmless beat on the table. Finally, she extended her hand. "Partners," she said. "But I warn you, Mr. Fowler, I don't tolerate being used or manipulated. If I sense any funny business, I'm out. Understood?" Preston shook her hand, a genuine smile crossing his face for the first time in weeks. "Understood. And please, it's Preston. We're partners now, after all." As they left the cafe, diving into the humid air of the city, Preston felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The first piece of his plan was in place. Jessica and Antonio might think they'd broken him, but they had no idea what was coming. Across the ocean, Jessica and Antonio were living it up, oblivious to the storm brewing. They'd moved into a penthouse apartment, paid for with Preston's stolen retirement funds. Jessica lounged by the rooftop pool, sipping champagne as Antonio massaged her shoulders. "You know," Antonio said, his hands working out a knot in Jessica's neck, "I could get used to this life." Jessica laughed, the sound echoing across the empty rooftop. "Well, get used to it, baby. We've got plenty to spare." Antonio's hands paused. "About that, how long do you think it'll take before the money transfer gets noticed?" Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "Please. Preston's probably crying into his blueprints right now. By the time he figures it out, if he ever does, we'll be long gone." She turned, pulling Antonio in for a kiss. "Now stop worrying and pour me another glass. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for." As they clinked their glasses together, neither of them noticed the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The storm was coming, whether they were ready or not. Preston hunched over the drafting table, his pen flying across the paper. Across from him, Maureen was deep in concentration, her computer screen flickering with complex 3D models. They'd been working nonstop for weeks, their design for a self-sustaining city taking shape before their eyes. "What if we integrated vertical farming here?" Maureen suggested, pointing to a section of the model. "It would increase food production and add a unique aesthetic element." Preston nodded, quickly sketching the idea. "Brilliant. And if we use native plants, it'll tie into the local ecosystem." Their partnership had flourished beyond Preston's wildest expectations. Maureen's innovative ideas perfectly complemented his technical expertise. As their design gained traction in the competition, Preston felt a surge of satisfaction. This was more than just a professional triumph. It was the first step in his plan for revenge. But even as he threw himself into the project, Preston hadn't forgotten about Jessica. In his spare moments, he'd been discreetly gathering information about her past and her home country. Every scrap of intel was carefully filed away, ammunition for the battle to come. His phone buzzed, Cameron's name flashing on the screen. Preston excused himself, stepping out onto the balcony of their rented workspace. "Cameron, what's the news?" His lawyer's voice crackled over the line. "The fraud case is solid, Preston. We've got her dead to rights on the retirement fund transfer. But there's more. We're pushing for an annulment based on Jessica's infidelity." Preston's grip tightened on the phone. "Excellent. What's the catch?" "I hear a but coming." Cameron sighed. "But there's a complication. She's trying to claim half your business assets. Says she supported you while you built the company, so she's entitled to a share." Preston's eyes narrowed, his free hand clenching into a fist. "Not for long, she's not." "What are you planning, Preston?" Cameron asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Don't worry about it," Preston said. "Just keep the legal pressure on. I'll handle the rest." He ended the call, his mind already racing. Jessica thought she could take half his company? She had another thing coming. Over the next few days, Preston initiated a series of careful maneuvers. He restructured his company, moving assets into protected trusts and offshore accounts. It was all perfectly legal, if a bit ethically gray. But Preston was past caring about ethics. This was about survival. As he worked, he kept one eye on the competition. Their design was gaining attention, industry insiders whispering about the dark horse team that was shaking things up. Preston allowed himself a smile. Let Jessica and Antonio think they'd won. The game was just beginning. Jessica frowned at the bank statement, her manicured nail tapping against the screen of her tablet. "Antonio," she called, her voice sharp. "Come look at this." Antonio sauntered in from the bedroom, still buttoning up his silk shirt. "What is it, babe?" "The money," Jessica said, thrusting the tablet at him. It's not all there." Antonio's brow furrowed as he looked at the numbers. "What do you mean? Did you spend more than you thought?" Jessica shot him a glare. "Don't be stupid. I know exactly how much I've spent. This is something else." She paced the room, her mind racing. "It's Preston. It has to be. That sneaky bastard is up to something." Antonio flopped onto the couch, looking unconcerned. "So what? We still have plenty. And by the time he figures out how to get it back, we'll be long gone." Jessica whirled on him, her eyes flashing. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about the money. It's about winning. And I refuse to let that pathetic excuse for a man beat me." She grabbed her phone, furiously tapping out a message. "We need to hit back. Hard." "What are you thinking?" Antonio asked, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. Jessica's lips curved into a cruel smile. Preston's always been so proud of his precious skyscraper project. What if something were to go wrong? Over the next few days, Jessica and Antonio launched their counterattack. They spread rumors about structural instabilities in Preston's eco-friendly skyscraper, whispering to investors and city officials about potential safety hazards. But Preston was one step ahead. He'd anticipated their move, had been preparing for it since the moment Jessica betrayed him. Every stage of the project had been meticulously documented, every safety measure triple-checked and verified by independent experts. When the rumors reached fever pitch, Preston calmly presented his evidence. Blueprints, safety reports, material analyses, all laid out in a press conference that left no room for doubt. The attempted sabotage backfired spectacularly, damaging Jessica and Antonio's credibility instead. As Preston wrapped up the press conference, fielding questions from reporters with ease, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Maureen. Saw the news. Nicely done. But we've got work to do. Competition deadlines coming up. Preston allowed himself a small smile as he texted back. On my way. Let's show them what real innovation looks like. Across town, Jessica threw her phone against the wall, watching with satisfaction as it shattered. That bastard, she seethed. How does he always stay one step ahead? Antonio, lounging on the couch, barely looked up from his magazine. Maybe it's time to cut our losses, babe. We've still got enough. Enough? Jessica interrupted, her voice rising to a shriek. It's not about enough. It's about winning. And I refuse to let Preston win. She stormed over to the liquor cabinet, pouring herself a generous glass of scotch. As she drank, her mind raced. The money was dwindling faster than she'd anticipated. Preston was outmaneuvering her at every turn. She needed to act fast. We need to speed up the divorce proceedings, she said, more to herself than to Antonio. Secure what assets we can before Preston can protect them all. Antonio finally looked up, a hint of concern in his eyes. Jess, maybe we should. Shut up, Jessica snapped. I'm not asking for your opinion. Just do as I say. Got it? As Antonio nodded meekly, Jessica turned to stare out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Preston was plotting his next move. But she'd be damned if she'd let him win. This war was far from over. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Architects, investors, and media from around the world had gathered for the final presentations of the International Sustainable City Design Competition. Preston stood backstage, his heart pounding. Months of work, sleepless nights, and relentless planning had led to this moment. Maureen approached, her face a mask of calm determination. Ready? Preston nodded, straightening his tie. Born ready. As they waited for their turn, Preston's eyes scanned the audience. His breath caught in his throat as he spotted two familiar faces. Jessica and Antonio sat near the back, whispering to each other and smirking. They'd come to gloat, no doubt expecting him to fail. Looks like we have some unexpected guests, Maureen muttered, following Preston's gaze. Preston's jaw clenched. Good. Let them watch. Next up, presenting their design for a self-sustaining urban ecosystem, Preston Fowler and Maureen Kigali. The announcer's voice boomed. As they took the stage, Preston locked eyes with Jessica for a brief moment. Her smug smile only fueled his determination. He turned to the judges, his voice steady and confident as he began their presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see isn't just a city. It's a living, breathing ecosystem that will revolutionize urban living. For the next 30 minutes, Preston and Maureen laid out their vision. They detailed the vertical farms integrated into residential towers, the revolutionary waste management system that turned garbage into energy, and the network of green spaces that served both recreational and environmental purposes. As Maureen explained the cultural aspects of their design, Preston glanced at Jessica and Antonio. Their smiles had faded, replaced by looks of growing unease. The judges peppered them with questions, which Preston and Maureen fielded with ease. Their preparation paid off as they addressed every concern and elaborated on the finer points of their design. As they concluded, the audience erupted into applause. Preston allowed himself a small smile. They'd nailed it. Hours later, after all the presentations were complete, the judges returned to announce the winner. After careful deliberation, the head judge began. We are pleased to announce that the winner of this year's International Sustainable City Design Competition is Preston Fowler and Maureen Kigali. The auditorium exploded with cheers. Preston and Maureen embraced, both of them grinning from ear to ear. As they made their way to the stage to accept their award, Preston caught sight of Jessica and Antonio slinking towards the exit, their faces twisted with anger and disappointment. The next hour was a whirlwind of congratulations, interviews, and handshakes. Preston's phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues and potential clients. This win wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a game-changer for his career. As the crowd began to thin, Preston spotted Jessica making her way towards him. Her face was a mask of false cheer, but he could see the calculation in her eyes. "Preston, darling," she called, her voice sickly sweet. "Congratulations on your win. I always knew you had it in you." Preston turned to face her, his expression cold. "Save it, Jessica. We both know you came here hoping to see me fail." Jessica's smile faltered. "Now, that's not fair." "You what?" Preston interrupted. "Thought you'd swoop in and take credit? Try to weasel your way back into my life now that I'm successful again." He leaned in close, his voice low. "Let me make this clear. You're nothing to me now. Nothing but a mistake I'm in the process of erasing." Jessica's face contorted with rage. "You bastard. You think you've won? This isn't over." Preston smiled, a cold, ruthless expression that made Jessica take a step back. "Oh, it's far from over. But trust me, you won't like how it ends." He turned his back on her, rejoining Maureen and a group of investors who were eagerly discussing future projects. As he engaged in the conversation, Preston could feel Jessica's glare boring into his back. But for the first time since her betrayal, he felt nothing but satisfaction. The tables had turned, and Jessica was about to learn just how badly she'd miscalculated. The courthouse loomed before Preston, a monument to justice that would soon become the stage for his final act of retribution. He straightened his tie, his face a mask of calm determination as he climbed the steps. Inside, he found Cameron waiting, a thick briefcase in hand. "Ready for this?" the lawyer asked, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Preston nodded. "More than ready. Let's finish this." They entered the courtroom, the wooden doors creaking ominously behind them. Jessica and Antonio were already there, huddled with their lawyer. Jessica shot Preston a venomous glare as he took his seat, but he ignored her, focusing instead on the task at hand. The judge entered, and the court fell silent. "We're here today in the matter of Fowler versus Fowler," she announced, her voice echoing in the hushed room. "Mr. Schneider, you may present your case." Cameron stood, his presence commanding the room. "Your Honor, what we have here is not just a simple divorce case. This is a story of betrayal, fraud, and malicious intent." Over the next hour, Cameron laid out their case with surgical precision. He presented evidence of Jessica's infidelity, complete with time-stamped photos and hotel receipts. He detailed the illegal transfer of Preston's retirement funds, showing bank statements and tracing the money trail. "But Your Honor," Cameron continued, his voice rising with controlled indignation, "the defendant's actions go beyond mere infidelity and theft. They actively attempted to sabotage my client's professional reputation." He presented affidavits from investors and city officials, revealing Jessica and Antonio's attempts to spread false rumors about Preston's skyscraper project. Email trails and recorded phone calls painted a damning picture of their malicious campaign. As Cameron spoke, Preston watched Jessica's face. Her confident smirk had long since faded, replaced by a look of growing panic. Antonio, for his part, looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Cameron said, producing a final set of documents, "we have evidence of the defendant's past indiscretions in her home country. Actions that, if brought to light, could have serious consequences for her immigration status." Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected this, hadn't realized how thoroughly Preston had investigated her past. The judge's face grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the evidence. When Cameron finally concluded, she turned to Jessica's lawyer. "Counselor, do you have anything to add in your client's defense?" Jessica's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who seemed out of his depth, stuttered through a weak rebuttal. His argument sounded hollow in the face of the mountain of evidence Cameron had presented. After a brief recess, the judge returned to deliver her verdict. The courtroom held its breath. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, the judge began, her voice filled with disgust. "I rule entirely in favor of the plaintiff, Preston Fowler. The marriage is hereby annulled on grounds of fraud and infidelity. All of Mrs. Fowler's claims to Mr. Fowler's assets are dismissed." Preston allowed himself a small smile as the judge continued. "Furthermore, Mrs. Fowler is ordered to repay the stolen retirement funds with interest. And given the evidence of her past indiscretions and current illegal activities, I am recommending a full investigation into her immigration status." Jessica's face drained of color. She turned to Antonio, but he was already inching away from her, his eyes darting towards the exit. As the judge's gavel fell, Preston stood, buttoning his jacket. He looked at Jessica, seeing not the woman he had loved for 20 years, but a stranger who had tried to destroy him. "I told you this wasn't over," he said quietly as he passed her. "Enjoy your trip home." Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. Preston paused on the steps, Cameron at his side. "Mr. Fowler, how do you feel about the verdict?" Preston straightened his tie, his face a mask of professional calm. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a city to build." As he walked away, leaving the chaos behind him, Preston felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The betrayal that had nearly broken him was now nothing more than a closed chapter in his life. Ahead lay new challenges, new triumphs. And this time, he'd face them on his own terms. Months passed like pages turning in a book, each one filled with victories both personal and professional. Preston stood atop his completed skyscraper, the wind whipping at his suit as he surveyed the city sprawling below. The eco-friendly building was a testament to his vision, a gleaming beacon of sustainable architecture that had already become a landmark. The door to the roof opened, and Maureen stepped out to join him. In the months since their competition win, she had become more than just a partner. She was a friend, a confidant, and a driving force in their newly formed international firm. "Quite a view," Maureen said, coming to stand beside him. "Hard to believe how far we've come in such a short time." Preston nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's been quite a journey." Maureen leaned against the railing, her eyes sparkling with barely contained excitement. "I've got some news," she said. "I heard through the grapevine about Jessica and Antonio." Preston raised an eyebrow, curious despite himself. "Oh, they were last seen arguing at the airport," Maureen said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Apparently, he dumped her when the money ran out. Left her high and dry at the departure gate." Preston absorbed this information, surprised to find that he felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, not even pity. Just nothing. "Karma," he said simply. Maureen studied his face for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with what she saw. "So," she said, changing the subject, "shall we discuss our next project? I've got some ideas for that renewal contract in Singapore." As they delved into the details of their upcoming work, Preston found his mind wandering. He thought about the man he had been just a year ago. Trusting, naive, blindsided by betrayal. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more cautious, but also more fulfilled. The betrayal had nearly broken him, it was true. But from those broken pieces, he had built something far greater than he had ever imagined. A thriving international firm, a reputation as a pioneer in sustainable architecture, and genuine connections with people who valued him for his skills and his character, not what they could take from him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Preston allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had not just survived, he had thrived. The city below, with its bustling streets and soaring buildings, seemed to pulse with possibility, and he was ready to shape it, one innovative design at a time. "You know," he said to Maureen, interrupting her mid-sentence about solar panel efficiency, "I think we're going to need a bigger office." Maureen laughed, the sound carried away by the wind. "Dreaming big again, are we?" Preston smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. "Always," he said. "After all, why stop now?" As they turned to head back inside, Preston cast one last look at the city skyline. The past was behind him, a closed book. Ahead lay endless possibilities, a future limited only by his imagination and will. And for the first time in a long time, Preston Fowler was excited to see what tomorrow would bring.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Hi there. I'm a woman in my 30s, and I've been married for 7 years now. My husband and I started dating in our mid-20s during college, and we ended up getting married in our late 20s, which was relatively early for us. To be honest, for the first couple of years of our marriage, we didn't even consider having children. We were actually using contraception, wanting to wait until we felt more settled in our life together. Since we married young, We wanted to enjoy our newlywed life to the fullest before starting a family, and that's exactly what we did. As we combined our lives and finances, we definitely saw ourselves growing faster together. Around our 3rd year of marriage, as we both entered our 30s, we started planning for children. Until then, we thought it would be easy to conceive and start a family. In fact, my first pregnancy happened in our 3rd year of marriage. However, I miscarried at 3 months, and both my husband and I were devastated by the loss. It was heart-wrenching to say goodbye to our first child so unexpectedly. I even quit my job to focus on trying to conceive again. Despite our efforts, 3 more years went by without any success in having a child. We were too proud to even consider visiting a fertility clinic. This could have easily strained our marriage, but it didn't. My husband has always been incredibly supportive, constantly creating special moments in our everyday life. He would take time off work without telling me to plan trips or buy camping gear, so we could travel all over the country together. I loved it. We visited famous restaurants nationwide and enjoyed beautiful scenery, which allowed us to momentarily forget about our struggles with infertility. But those were just temporary escapes. When my husband went to work, I felt utterly alone, struggling to cope. I sought counseling on my own and was diagnosed with depression by a psychiatrist. I tried to keep my medication a secret, but my husband eventually found out. Despite his unwavering support, my depression did not improve, as the root cause was our inability to have a child. Seeing how much I was suffering, my husband encouraged me to take up woodworking, something I had always wanted to learn since our dating days. He gave me some money to enroll in a class, and I booked a 1-day workshop at a local woodcraft studio. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely excited about learning something new. The class was a mix of various ages and genders. But what really took me by surprise was the instructor. A young, fit instructor in their mid to late 20s led the class. They made rounds to see how the students were doing with their work, and every time they spoke to me or took my hand to show me how to use a tool, my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. My relationship with my husband had become more of an obligation, with our interaction revolving around timing for ovulation, trying for a baby, and facing repeated disappointments. There was no excitement left in it, leaving me feeling quite drained. However, being around the instructor sparked romantic feelings in me. Despite knowing it wasn't right, my heart and mind reacted before I could stop them, almost as if I had a crush on the instructor. Initially, I had intended to attend the class only occasionally, but I found myself constantly thinking about the instructor. This led me to sign up for a month-long course, which eventually turned into enrolling in advanced classes as well. A bond started to form between us, as I found excuses to contact them for help or questions. One day, curious about how it would feel to meet the instructor outside of class, I asked if I could join them on their trip to buy supplies, suggesting it in a hopeful manner. They agreed, saying it would be fun to explore the market together. I was so nervous about asking them that I spent a lot of time getting ready, picking out my clothes and doing my makeup before leaving the house. That day, we bought supplies and had lunch together, enjoying what felt like a date. The instructor would casually touch my shoulder or hold my hand when we were around a lot of people, and I welcomed these gestures, feeling thrilled by the contact. As these days accumulated, my feelings for the instructor grew. Initially, I thought of it as a simple admiration, similar to how one might feel about a celebrity or actor. But even on days when there were no classes, I found myself missing them, and thoughts of the instructor would sneak into my mind even when I was with my husband, making me wonder if my feelings were more than just admiration. I was incredibly confused by my feelings as well. I couldn't quite define it, but I found myself wrestling with the complex idea of loving two people at the same time. One day, when my husband was away on a business trip and I was left alone at home, I felt bored and impulsively decided to visit the workshop where the instructor worked. I arrived just as they were finishing up a class and starting to clean up. They noticed me and asked, "What brings you here?" Trying to act casual, I said, "I was just passing by and got bored." "Have you had dinner yet?" as I helped them with the cleanup. It naturally progressed to me, suggesting we order some takeout and have a drink together. Since we often had meals together, the instructor readily agreed to my proposal. The instructor mentioned they were currently single. Knowing I was married, it somehow felt reassuring to hear that. Without thinking, I quietly said, "That's a relief." I was shocked at my own words. And so was the instructor, who looked at me wide-eyed. We just looked at each other, not saying anything, until the instructor broke the silence by asking, "What's a relief?" Flustered, I blurted out, "It was just something I said. It doesn't mean anything." The instructor then asked, "Really? It means nothing?" before finishing their drink. Not knowing how to respond, I just kept looking at the instructor. After finishing their drink, the instructor moved closer to me, and I found myself naturally drawn to them. That night, we ended up spending time together in the workshop. Even after that night, I continued attending the classes. The instructor began asking me to come in an hour early or stay back after class had ended, suggesting we spend a bit more time together. We also went on many dates under the pretext of buying supplies. It felt like the instructor and I naturally became closer. We drove to secluded spots and even visited restaurants. My husband had introduced me to just the two of us. This was during a time when my husband was deeply engrossed in his work, and I had become noticeably happier since starting my classes, so he was very supportive. In a way, I was comfortably engaging in an affair. Then one day, after feeling nauseous while eating, I took a pregnancy test and it came out positive. A doctor's visit confirmed I was 3 months pregnant, which meant the child was definitely my husband's, considering the timing of when I started attending the workshop. When I shared the news with my husband, he was overjoyed. He took me shopping for shoes and bags I had wanted, and even maternity clothes. Although it was still early, from the day he found out I was pregnant, he took over all the household chores, insisting I rest. Despite this, I continued to visit the workshop. Initially, I was just enjoying the dates, worried about possibly having a miscarriage again. As my pregnancy became more noticeable, the instructor started to find it odd. One day, they cautiously asked me if I was pregnant. I was so taken aback that I started crying. Without even understanding my own feelings, the instructor came over, hugged me, and comforted me. After a while, I told them, "This is as far as we go. We can't continue anymore." The instructor silently listened and then nodded in agreement. Honestly, I felt a mix of sadness and longing, so I hugged the instructor first. They accepted it silently. That was our last meeting, and we haven't seen each other since then. As I was leaving, the instructor said, "If you ever need me, for classes or otherwise, please come." I couldn't respond and just went home without looking back. Now, I'm in the final month of pregnancy and about to give birth. My husband is still treating me well, and I'm excited to finally become a mother. Our friends and family, hearing that we're having a child after 7 years of marriage, have been sending gifts and congratulations. I've been so happy that I barely remember the times when I was feeling down, but whenever I pass by the workshop, either with my husband or alone, a pang of longing hits me. It's not just once or twice that I've found myself circling the building, tempted to go in, only to head back home. I wonder what I'd even do if I went. Now that I'm in my final month of pregnancy and showing significantly, part of me doesn't want the instructor to see me like this. It feels like more than just the emotional fluctuations due to pregnancy hormones. Of course, I love my husband, who has been by my side, taking great care of me all this time, but my feelings for the instructor are a different kind of longing. Sometimes, the workshop sends out texts about events and course information to its members, and I still receive these messages. Does that mean the instructor hasn't forgotten about me either?